Video essays. Now this is a saga we did for a good long while. Clearly we've got 2 to 3 hours of stuff to show today, but admittedly they've always kind of not succeeded on this channel that often. It's one of my most consistent underperforming things, though a lot of these videos I'm actually very proud of. They came in all sorts of forms over the years, sometimes with some real high quality production to them, and sometimes I'm just rambling about how nervous I am doing it for the first time. We'll have links to timestamps down below at the bottom of this video and in the description, but otherwise, please enjoy our entire saga of video essays, and admittedly, we're probably never gonna do them again. A nice side little thing, and multiple hours, all plonked together today. Please enjoy. No. Or at least, I don't think so. I have seen many farts in my time, as I'm sure you have too. It's a part of life, right? But the most common place you are to find a fart, other than a Glastonbury Festival public portaloo, is through bloody kids' movies. And I've seen a lot of them. And you know, as a 27-year-old now, I don't get behind them nowadays. I am an avid fart hater. Even in real life, when I'm surrounded by a bunch of people giggling because Harry over there has a boldly let one rip, I don't enjoy it. I'm just not a fan of toilet humor. That's a personal preference of mine. So when I'm admittedly watching a movie that's sometimes beneath my demographic identity, I find myself rolling my eyes pretty consistently when a movie goes on a tangent to the lowest common denominator to entertain a toddler on the side. But just because I'm not a fan of your average fart joke, doesn't mean that opinion is shared by the masses. And just because I would feel relieved from experiencing another flatulent tune, doesn't mean the fart joke is even close to coming to a close. This type of joke is probably the type to linger longer in the air than any other form of humor out of human existence. I think it could even brave beyond the elusive dick joke as well. It just has a broader demographic, doesn't it? And so I'm gonna swallow my pride and talk about fart jokes for, well, you can see how long it'll be. I'm literally prioritizing a deep dive on derriere deliverance over unpacking my IRL home. I'm sure I'll get around to it eventually. And so the hunt begins to find out what's out there in the world of farts, to perhaps find the golden sparkle against the brown grain, to find a fart joke that is more than just good, but the best out of all of the options. This is my first quest to find the best fart joke out there, keeping it classy. And so I went out to find the smartest fart joke there is, and then came straight back home, because it'll be found through research on my computer, of course. What do you think this video is, anyway? Did you know the earliest fart joke was started in 1900 BC? Now that's a long fart. Okay, alrighty then. I guess we should scratch that one out of the book and never perform it again. I see, I can read the room, yeah. Okay, so let's look at the more recent croppings of fart jokes, the kind of stuff we're dealing with almost 4,000 years later. What has this last decade given us in ways of keeping the rotten fresh? Well, here's the Sonic movie. Admittedly, a pretty great movie all around, other than being a little safe, but for the farts...
Oh, come on. What did you eat?
I think it's called a chili dog?
It's just kinda shoved in there. There is no greater context here. Sonic just randomly lets one rip now he's settled in his gown. You could argue it's to boost a character trait since he does get to mention chili dogs, but kind of a crappy demonstration. It really wasn't needed, was it? Not exactly breaking new ground. How's about Sing?
Let me see now.
Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. Oh, what is wrong?
Classy. Running closer to a character trait, I guess, it's the nervous fart type of gag. Once is an eye roll, twice is pushing it, but after that...
Oh, I gotcha. Oh, whoopsie. Oh.
Okay.
This is just excessive. But hey, at least the movie's demographic is a little lower to accommodate for the low brow. Minions 2 is somewhat seen as a mature step up from Illumination's prior immaturities. I think we all pretty much were greatly surprised there, so moving over to one that's not as bad as it could have been, let's see Minions 2, with a spin on the fart in the form of a... stink bomb, bringing us into the territory of just green gas, but I don't mind this one too much. It's all in character, it's a hint of creativity, and it's to contribute to the action by emptying a room. Though, does it even really count? Naturally, I would like the one that's the most off-field from the fart. You've then got the likes of Disney and Frozen, who would rather just imply it briefly with words more than anything else.
Don't know if I'm elated or gassy, but I'm somewhere in that zone.
Not that I would call that Disney's shining lyric. So you're telling me Anna can't tell the difference between a fart and happiness? Like, do they naturally give her a sense of elation? Are those images on Google actually true? And even in the super impressive successes like The Bad Guys, of course, has a farting moment snuck into the middle of it. Kind of another eye roll moment, to be honest. Even in some of the best.
I fart when I'm nervous. Lying. Sorry.
I mean, it's not as bad as Sonic's random integration, at least it incorporates some other elements. Look, it's the nervous farting like in Sing, and also with another category plugged in, the hotbox fart. And a whole lot of green gas too. To me though, it's another moment to stop staring at the screen and look into the fourth wall camera kind of moment again. Even the diamonds can have rough spots. But it could always be worse. The shining spotlight moment of recent fart jokes, of course, have come from the barrel-scraping bottoms of that one era of DreamWorks with Trolls and Boss Baby. You know what I'm about to show you. Each having bare butts, because even just that imagery alone can be funny and unexpected, but then with Trolls, they dive right into it with...
Something's missing.
That's it!
glitter. That, admittedly, is quite new, but certainly not classy by any means. In fact, it seems closer to literally defecating on cinema than any other example I'll be showing this video. But then you get Boss Baby. Don't do that. Why is there canonically baby powder shoved way up inside that baby? But the thing is, when it comes to just reviewing content by most recent, you have to deal with a lot of crap. There's no highlights in a recents reel. No one cares what song released on September 4th, 1996. We just recognize the big hits from 1996. I have no idea what song that would be while I'm recording this. Play us a piece? Alright, that's enough. Anyway, fart joke can be a lot more than just this generic schmuck. They can come in all sorts of forms. After all, farts themselves can come in all sorts of presentations beyond the surface level approach. Take, for example, the fire starter. Someone somewhere along the road came up with the idea of gas being equivalent to gasoline, I guess, and sparked a light under the genre with this design. Jumping right into cartoon logic, it's when a fart is more than a fart. It's a weapon, too. This kind of twist on the standard fart mechanic, I'll admit, has a hint of creative flair to it. Until it is done a second time. Or a third. Now, in some examples, the moment is clearly on brand and acts more as an extension of a character trait. Lloyd, I imagine, would be very thrilled by toilet humor. But when you've seen one, you've seen them all. At least it's not gross. Which next brings us to the gurgle. Again, another turn on aspects of flatulent mechanics. This one elaborates more on the pre-production in a way that genuinely makes my stomach turn sometimes. Digging so deep into toilet humor, we are literally hearing our subject's bowel movements. To me, it's flying a little too closely to the guts that just make everything seem uncomfortable. On the lighter side, you have the likes of the live-action Scooby-Doo movie. And on the other, you have Robot Chicken. Is there something to be said by the length of a moment? Does the entertainment factor of a fart scene improve like a bell curve before getting dull again or something? Because both of these examples go on a while. But when you do that, you then lean more into falling into the pitfall that is the stock sound effect. You know what this sounds like. It's an even less impressive version of the most basic and standard fart. It's just adding in a cheeky little sound effect and calling it a day. Now this is what comes to mind when I think of a fart joke.
2 words, sir. Personal hygiene.
So sometimes there isn't even a movement to even acknowledge that the sound is in there, if it's just a standalone sound effect plugging in an edit. Or if there is, it's just so lazily put together. I'll call it out, this clip always gets a mention on highlight reels.
Cajun point.
Who there called my name?
Yeah, I called you if your name is.
Sure, I guess there's something there that the Nan mistakes it for their name, but the rest...
Who pulled that?
Yeah, way to clog up the sense that we're supposed to be laughing by just having all the actors laughing in your place. I feel like an audience member watching canned laughter here, and boy does this type of fart just take me immediately out of the moment if I can recognize the exact intonation of a toot. That's vegan fart voice 003! Of course, that is the absolute bottom of the pile kind of fart jokes. The basic, the stock sound effect. But with 4,000 years to input ideas, and the last 100 being actually recorded, here's some others we've seen variations of. The silent but deadly. Not all too common. It's brave to make a fart joke without an audible fart, right? Is that what we're calling it? Brave? Well, it's here in Shaun of the Dead.
I'm sorry, Sean.
And you know what? I'll give this one props. This is full-on character development, or at least a trait. It knows it's gross, and it's attached to the immaturity of one of our main characters. I have very little negatively to say about Shaun of the Dead, other than that it still somehow scared me when I was younger. And even their fart jokes have meaning and intention? Though it's not really funny that much, is it? Maybe a smirk gets out of you at most. Fun fact, I was actually accidentally in the same room as Edgar Wright over this summer. Yeah, we were both watching the same show at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which was just very strange. Didn't recognize him for a long time, and I also didn't speak to him because I didn't have much to say. And then I realized he was the guy behind one version of the cancelled Me and My Shadow production. I can't believe I missed my shot on that completely. I fumbled the bag! The sorry. This one's much like the stock sound effect, but with a single line added in to support it.
Sorry. What we got here?
It's a fart that's almost hidden under the rug, as if to say even the movie doesn't want to linger on it, which is really saying something considering the rest of the movie is the bloody Cat in the Hat. Other times you'll get the lactose intolerant.
I'm garlic intolerant.
This is just the sorry with a little mixing of the stock sound effects. It's not really a character trait, is it? It's just a cheap joke to fill the pause in actual writing ability or intention. The insult. I feel pretty insulted every time I'm subjected to someone's abdomen abdications, but some characters take the punchline as a way to directly insult someone else.
Place where women rule.
Yeah, you know what I have to say about that?
This is never funny. It's more like padding to pass the time before the real entertainment starts.
I fart in your general direction. Your mother was a hamster.
I stand corrected. The concept can be funny. It's all in the execution. Or maybe you just need an over-the-top accent to pull it off. The hotbox. Now, we've mentioned the hotbox briefly before during the bad guys, but there are other examples to show off, since sometimes it's not about the act itself, but the aftermath and suffering of those in proximity. Take, in this case, Toy Story 2.
Thus and last forever. Good heavens. Was that me?
Literally in the case, where the victim was themselves. Who'd have thought even Pixar would be the sort to do a fart joke? But again, I don't despise this one. Yes, it was just shoved in there, and they faintly try to bolster it up with...
I guess that's why they call me Stinky Pete.
But it doesn't disrupt the movie, for this is entirely set in the blooper reel. It takes a more realistic approach to when a fart would actually happen. And I think it's the case that leads into one of the better forms of the fart joke to actually be funny, the accident. Everything in film is intentional. For it to be viewed by us judgmental audiences, it has to be performed, accepted, processed, edited, and then rendered out to us. So by that very nature, there's not much room for a natural fart joke. And yet, sometimes, the most funny scenarios for blips like this are in the unexpected. And what's more unexpected than an accident itself? When it's done by... It's clearly not an accident, or any of these animated or movie productions. But where else do we get exposed to the expulsion of excretive matter than in reality itself? Or over in the documentation of it within the internet? Now, I'm not on fart TikTok. I've heard that is a thing, and to be honest, if I was to ever find a fart joke funny, it would probably be within there. We've all, as a child, enjoyed fart jokes at some point in our lives. I mean, I, for example, did laugh at that old Cat in the Hat clip. So, the fact that anybody can demonstrate their own deliverance of such a gag in such a way, and anybody can post it out there into the interwebs, means there's probably something out there that I would genuinely find funny, and there are more formats to play with. For example, the televised accident. Picture it. You've been working on yourself for months now. You integrated with a great new trainer who wants to let out their own expression of self-support out to the world, and finally, they get their big break and want to bring you along. It's an early start, but 5 a.m. startup later, and you're out there on national breakfast television. All you have to do is follow your instructor, your good friend, through a kind of motion you've been through several times before. A little stretch in this direction, a mild push in that, and then disaster strikes.
Okay, let's...
This is hilarious. Am I the problem child for genuinely finding this embarrassment funny? Since in a closed room, this would be humorous, a little mistake among friends to likely not be shared about too much. But to have it broadcast live on national television, available for hundreds if not thousands to witness in a single moment, exposed on a grand scale in the most unexpected way, yes, it disrupts the story of life, but something about the real article makes a gag like this so much more entertaining. And boy, can you find plenty of those across your search against the web. There's more than just genuine accidents of embarrassment. How's about the planned deliveries with a mistimed execution? The cough cover-up. I think the first time this was a genuine misstep by the poster.
Is there something you'd like to say, Mr. Griffin?
No.
But future redos copying the same format still sometimes have that greatness factor to them, just for the unique sounds of them all. It's like the opposite of the stock sound effect for being part of a genuine ecosystem. Buttholes come in all sorts of shapes and sizes after all. But then, sometimes there's a type of stock sound effect that achieves success in the direct opposite direction. Introducing the ironic sound effect. An iconic piece of flatulent tune that stands out for intentionally standing out, and being placed perhaps where it doesn't belong for comedic effect. Sometimes it's something as simple as a mass added effect on a collection of explosions.
Is the party over?
Whilst other times it reinvents a scene so much that you can't even recognize it without.
So, you're the punk I've heard about.
What is that win meant to be anyway? You can't convince me it's not.
So, you're the punk I've heard about.
It's the fabled fart with reverb sound effect. Why does this particular stock sound work better than most? Because it is as ridiculous as it is applied. The gag is not the fact that it exists, but that it exists again. A recurring punchline in the form of a fart. It's like the Wilhelm scream, but from the other end. And of course, with the internet, that's not the only one. Now, if you're anything like me, I'm sorry. You ever heard of...
Uh-oh. Stinky poop.
But you see, yes, for but a brief moment, poo-poo do indeed be funny. For uh-oh stinky evolves into a form of post-irony the longer it drones on. Maybe even post-irony, you know? A post-meta-modern irony twang, if you will, of a meme. Transcending beyond just the sound of the raspberry farts and onto the voice and its reactions instead. Overexposing the humor of the moment into a nonsensical monologue of repetition and reaction. All the while we are forced to stare into the beast of an entirely unrelated picture. It's a monkey. It's kind of uh-oh-y in the face, and it is bearing all. But it's not the one talking. That'd be ridiculous. It's not the one farting either. And yet, here it sits, eternally becoming fused with this sound log of a boy laughing at his own sounds that he has to inform us that is funny, thus turning it to be funny again, only for one day his cousin to take the joke further.
Wow, hey, stinky! Funny boy!
For it's the riffing off of one joke and into another that is something the cinema screen could never achieve so effectively. And sometimes, the longevity of a joke is directly correlated to its level of success. Longer fart is apparently funnier, for how far the extreme can go. Ah yes, I guess this is a genre of fart we can next delve into, the long fart. Some people have an incredible capacity of gas within them, or they've just had surgery. You get the idea. Did he really have to move the camera closer? And sometimes that surgery allows for the expelling of gas to far exceed expectations of a regular flatulent load. It is in the subversion of the standard that this could become humorous. Despite being a fully orchestrated event, still, it comes off as genuine. Or how's about that time fart enjoyers got to witness a ghost?
Did you see it? On the left side of the doorframe, barely visible on camera, a white translucent mist-like cloak slowly creeps into frame.
The gag in this one being simultaneously the juggling of two gripping subjects, with both the original footage being a cataclysmic conceptual attack, as well as the narrator's direction, only for the editorial trickery of this clip to take effect, as the original clip unexpectedly continues to rebel against the narrator's overreaching voice despite the circumstance. And sometimes, you just have to expose how Alexa does it.
Alexa, I'd rather fart for me.
Oh, a simple and genuine demonstration, added by the nuance of hearing clearly designed stock sounds, but ones we haven't heard before.
Here's Big Fart. Oh, shit. Oh, that was a deep one.
And that was just an extract of how the internet does fart jokes. It's now time to get back to your regularly scheduled coverage.
Not searching for boog.
This is bad. In comparison to all we have just seen, maybe it's just the scripted nature of movies that makes fart jokes so tiring when you've seen enough of them. Or maybe I'm just looking in all the wrong places. Wait, you're telling me I'm wasting my time coming out here for like a 10-second shot? So let's switch over. Hey, I said 10 seconds, don't cut me off at 5. So let's switch over to Pixar again. With Finding Nemo. Did you know there was a fart joke in this movie? Thinking about it, it probably makes sense. And it actually is in the scene we saw the internet edit over from before. It's in the landmine scene, whereby all these mines go off, it's all horrible and dramatic until...
Nice.
This is pretty decent. Maybe because there wasn't actually a fart in it, just the implication of one. It's the fact that it wasn't a fart that it puts an exhale through the nostril, playing on the bubbles element of a fart. Sweet. Or how's about another spin on the not actually a fart, the hand fart, covered in robots.
Yeah, baby. Let it rip.
Until they do it for real anyway.
Get a load of this.
But again, it's pretty decent, getting you into the realm of the joke preemptively before cascading you with an execution from the most bottomly built bosom of the entire movie. And a little bit of intestinal humor in there too.
Lady, please. See a doctor.
Actually, that's quite a nice spin. It's quite frequent to see someone pass out from the aftermath, but to wipe out a streetlight? That's impressive. But we're not quite done with Robin Williams yet, as there's always his other contribution to the fart ecosphere, I would not want to physically be in there, with probably one of the most genuine and emotional presentations of a fart joke, in Good Will Hunting.
She woke herself up. Yes.
What makes this example so special is the fact that, well, there's several facts really. On the analytical front, there is no fart, we're just hearing about a fart. Putting it in our imagination oftentimes leads to a better delivery than any attempt at the real thing. But also, it's a story told in the center of the topic of grieving. Robin's wife in this tale has passed, and yet this embarrassing tale helps to lift the mood on the topic, and in the most profound ways, even giving us an incredibly emotive perspective on life.
She's been dead 2 years, and that's the shit I remember. It's wonderful stuff, you know? Little things like that.
Who'd have thought a fart joke that could make one cry? And supposedly, this story was improvised by Robin Williams. It wasn't in the script. Meaning it could very well be a real tale he's exposing. A genuine article in the middle of a scripted masterpiece to put a tear in your eye. Well, that's enough of that. Time for some Family Guy. Family Guy and South Park both take a similar approach to farting humor, at least. They each did once, at least, along their overblown runtime. Adding to the list, the musical fart.
Is an instrument?
I was entertained once, when I was like 13, but then I think the format got a little tired, ironically for going too long this time around. I guess the concept is there, and the execution is clearly quite earwiggy, but seems like a tired old thing now. So what about those that are more connected to character? We saw briefly a little stint with Shrek, and honestly, all 4 films have fart jokes in them. The bubbles of Finding Nemo return as an immediately establishing of Shrek's character in Shrek 1. Shrek 2 then brings it back practically the same, but now with Fiona as a partner. You've then got Shrek 3 adding in the babies and that scene before Firestarter bit. And then Shrek 4 goes for the mild Family Guy musical approach.
Better out than in.
Lion King's fart jokes are also intrinsically linked to their character, with Pumbaa always doing something.
I'm a sensitive soul, though I seem thick-skinned.
I think making the fart jokes here is fine. It is half of their personality. Sure, whatever. Kind of an eye roll, but I don't have the childhood nostalgia for this movie anyway. Skipped it for some reason. And then there's the answer everyone seems to tell you when talking about the best fart joke in cinema. I didn't see this movie. You didn't see this movie, and yet it is hailed as one of the greatest fart jokes of all time, according to the comments of YouTube videos. That of Blazing Saddles.
How about some more beans, Mr. Taggart? I'd say you've had enough.
This group accident, I guess you could call it. This is like the Citizen Kane of fart jokes. It is a movie for students and hipsters. It is the best of the best, according to a bunch of old fogies, probably because it did it first. But it's not the best now. Admittedly, I don't even fully understand it, but you'll see this answer everywhere, and I could not care less for it. But as we come to a close, there's a handful of genres I wanted to pull out there that either didn't get their screen time, or perhaps were already intermixed in the highlights we've shown. Think of it like some runner-ups on the format that is fart jokes. In the collection we have the skunk fart. I barely count these as fart jokes, but you know how 99% of these play out. You've also got the warning, the loose, the loud, the blame the dog, the sudden wake up, the bathroom stall, the echoed, the smell, the raspberry, the funny story, and the overdone. But against it all, I think I found one. The shining golden piece amongst the smears of comedy. The joke that I would barter to say is the greatest fart joke of the bunch. Through all trials and tribulations and whatever the hell it was I thought I was doing for this shot, we've tackled the decent, going a hint against the grain with a hint of creativity, if not for the fact that their very creativity had essentially been done prior. We had the bad, the stock sound effects with little attempt of changing the norm other than blowing wind in our direction. And we've had the weird with, well, practically anything the internet has ever done. And there's the insidious too, examples of companies doing these jokes for the cheapest of deliveries, baked into a soulless checklist of the unimaginative and the easy. But now, with too many fart jokes under our belt, we stand here with the joke I find to be the best. Can a fart joke even really be smart? A smafart joke? Well, it doesn't make me guffaw out loud, but it is this. Lion King 1.5.
Yep, after a long day of doing nothing, it's good to kick back.
The gang are enjoying themselves with a Saharan jacuzzi, I guess, when...
Think I'll turn in for the night.
It was all revealed to be a ruse. Another play on the mechanic of the bubbles. It's not about the sound, it's not about the smell. This one is the closest thing to intelligence in its delivery, and is why today I will be bestowing this as the greatest fart joke up to this point. Gone are the days of the stock, or the nervous, even the bubbles of Finding Nemo to me come off as a great runner-up, because at the end of the day, the burning question across this entire quest has been, so, are fart jokes funny? No, I still don't really think they are. Sometimes they can be good. After all, this entire video has been a highlight reel of examples and representations, and yet, that's decades worth of content compiled together, and this is about as good as it gets. But when you're in the mix of it, when you're just watching any given recent approach to the gag, it's just so much unending, regurgitating crap. It's why I typically roll my eyes at any new fart joke that falls out, because a good fart joke, let alone a great one, is rare. The vast majority of visuals we get to deal with are the stock sound effects, the green gas, or just a sound to laugh at the end of a beat. While there are diamonds in the rough in the world of flatulence, most of the time, it is the easy, cheap, and unthoughtful approach that bleeds through every version we see. Does it get kids to laugh? Sure. Does Leonardo DiCaprio have a surprising adoration for the art form of the fart form? Apparently yes, but does it justify it enough to be in every example? I don't think so. If your demographic is literally 5 years and younger, then sure, but as we've seen, that's not always the case, and more often than not, it's the forgettable type of fart joke that takes its place. Even the best of the best don't have me laughing out loud, only appreciating them with an exhale at most, or a huh, if it's lucky. And that still to me just isn't that great of a joke. I've been around the block, I have smelt more than enough to have dealt this decision, and I shall conclude my journey there. The road was not that long, actually. I had a deadline to keep, and that deadline certainly was sooner than the one telling me to unpack my damn house. It's at this point I would like to thank my patrons, of which I have none. I don't have a Patreon. Thank you for watching! If it wasn't clear already, I was quite nervous doing this, but I'd like to do this more. It was very much a fun project to work on. Welcome to my style of comedy. It's a weird one. Strap in. In case it wasn't clear, I was quite nervous doing this, so it's definitely a new start for me. Also, it is heatwave weather in the middle of Britain right now, so I'm not just this gross and sweaty looking always. I just have some slightly bad lighting and just genetically very active pores. I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to get used to it. I really enjoyed making this video, so I'm gonna make more. Of course, opinions are just opinions, and apparently I'm keeping it classy for my very first proper video essay, so we'll look forward to more. But if you'd want to assist on this new video essay series, give us some suggestions for what kind of out-of-field prompts and stuff you'd like to see. Architecture in Pixar movies, the Tom Holland protagonist, are safe movies even bad? Dick jokes, I don't know, don't even get me started on the bloody floss dance that plagued every single movie for 7 years!
Everywhere I go, I see his face.
The Tom Holland protagonist. You've heard of it before, right? It's like a phase within the animation industry to cherry-pick a kind of mold for a main character to look like. I'm not talking about the examples where Tom Holland is literally the protagonist. This goes way beyond the years of that measly little 27-year-old. The Tom Holland face is, you know, this face, or this face, or this one. The characteristics of the Tom Holland archetype are a little bit fluid, but generally what you're looking for is a round face, typically brown hair, more often than not bushy, but it can go pretty short sometimes, curly, wavy, anime, that kind of look. Sometimes there's a real big schnoz in the middle, though later down the line we've seen more button noses that still fit the bill. Big ears are also optional, but very apparent. Tom Holland does kind of look like an elf, I guess. But the more defining characteristics are the awkward disposition. This is a must. They gotta stutter, they gotta be unconfident. Being shy or shy adjacent is a must. From a glance, you can just tell that they are meant to be an unmasculine type of character. Definitely small and oftentimes dainty. You know, the type of lad that looks like you could snap him in half and they glow like a glow stick. just like the real Tom Holland. But of course, even as I list out details that are usually used, a lot of each of these bullet points also have some variations behind them, as even characters that don't have most of these traits still can kinda fall into that uncanny Tom Holland valley. There are dozens of characters with the Tom Holland face. I mean, let's just have a look at some of them. There is, of course, first up, the Direct to Holland collection, which more likely than not just started modeling their models off of the model of T. Holland's looks, because he was literally cast in these roles, and probably to play into his typecasted role aesthetic. This is your Blue Sky Studios Spies in Disguise Walker Beckett. He's thin, he's nerdy, he's fluffy. It's practically Peter Parker. Switch on over from tech to fantasy and you get to Pixar's Onward and Ian. Somehow, it's identical. Skin tone be damned, and we don't even seem to mind the wingspan of his ears being enough to receive radio signals at this point. Also thin, also fluffy, giant nose. Tom Holland. But then, let's see some examples that don't literally have Holland's voice coming out of them, and we don't have to look too far, because in the classical collection of standard faces, we could jump ahead a holiday and reach Arthur in Arthur Christmas. I can't exactly explain where he's identical, but he is identical. The nose dimensions, the dwindly legs, even with a slight haircut on the fluff, since this is 2011 and we're not full-on Gen Z anymore, and it really is like a copy and paste job. And back in this ancient age of 12 years ago, where memes look like this, it's not even a Tom Holland artifact coming in anymore. The Tom Holland face is bigger than Tom Holland. Since, unless Aardman and Sony Pictures were paying way too much attention to some random comedian's 14-year-old son, they didn't even know that they were on trend. In fact, the Tom Holland face can even go further back in animated time, back to 2007, and Pixar again, with Ratatouille and Linguini. This is like that father figure to the Tom Holland trope. Dude would be in his early 40s by now. Do I want a Ratatouille spin-off sequel on Disney+? Regardless, it's Tom Holland's future look in another decade. A bit taller than the usual, but he's got the big nose, noticeable ear radius, and fluffy curly hair. This time in red. Awkward, unmanly, and boy does he know his way to noodle. He is the original Tom Holland face. And so shockingly fitted that he's barely even an outlier from the rest of the barrage. Other variations we can get are the likes of older Ben 10, more confident than usual, straighter hair and 2D, but I can see it in there. And even off of the classic studios, you've always got Bigfoot oh my god. Okay, who mutated Tom Holland with the insects again? You got Ron's Gone Wrong's Barney with a more square bone structure that still kinda has him in there, always with the radio dish ears. Cloudy with a chance of meatballs Flint feels like a multiversal variant of the archetype. That hair is technically fluffy, but different fluffy. The nose is the same but stretched to an oblong, as is the rest of the face shape. It's still got that Peter Parker scientism to it, but amped up a bunch. And his hair's black. Tom Holland adjacent. Tim Holland. And keeping tall too. And even when it's clear that the characters are designed to be from a specific region in the world, still that Tom Holland mask is melted on top of these characters to thread them all together into a format. Pixar's Luca's Luca is kinda there. Small, round, shy, and fluffy. Pixar really likes this design, huh? Big Hero 6 and Hero. Okay, this one's kinda pushing it, but he's fluffy, small, and round. It's another Peter Parker scientist. How to Train Your Dragon. Specifically one. Small boy. Round, shy, straight hair that still gets a little fluffy, and with a new direction for how to age it up. Hair getting fluffier, losing the roundedness, and growing a beard. The point is, Tom Holland crops up in a lot of different places, but it's not so much Tom Holland's fault, since this has clearly been an ongoing thing for a long time. What's also interesting to mention with all these examples is that they are not just random characters to be seen in the story, they are all right slap bang in the center of their stories. They are each the main character, and that reflects a lot on us. Rewind time back to the 80s, and this wasn't what our male protagonists looked like. The archetype back then was Arnold Schwarzenegger. You had buffed up Sylvester Stallone and Rocky. You had the A-Team. You had big, super muscly, manly man-men. Take it on monsters or war with massive guns and massive guns. And you could probably extrude that that was emblematic of what kind of fantasy people in the 80s wanted for their stories. They wanted the super strong hero archetype. They wanted to see the peak of physical form as it came together to take down an incredible opponent, be it aliens, predators, or other muscly, manly man-men. Wartime was very much on people's minds, so the visions of bazookas and helicopters felt very fitting in a decade of anxiety and suspicion. Then jump to male protagonists of the 90s, and suddenly we're a lot more slimmed down, but also pretty active in a different light, with political climates being typically more cooled, or at least relative to pretty much every other decade in existence, and fantasies were more based in just expressing past the boring and mundane. Now suddenly we had adults dealing with the corporate cubicle office job. Normal dudes who want to start a fight just to feel something. An average Joe who wants to escape his planned reality that has everything perfectly lined out for him to succumb to. It was a rise in comedy and lightheartedness to relieve from the grind of an unhappiness from the dull. It was about creating heroes that are accessible to the ordinary human. Early 2000s, I think everyone was just confused. Literally looking up 2000s male protagonists on Google Images doesn't even bring up a single full page of results. It was just a wild west of tales as we experimented with 3D animation programs and began the trend of just repeating what was done in the past. But come back to now with the 2010s and 20s and we're back to the Tom Holland look. Our protagonists now are lingeringly young, their potential not yet reached. It's about the optimism for even the less strong amongst us to grow into something to be proud of. But what does that say about us? Anxiety. It threads through all the decades. These days, we're all feeling pretty weak and vulnerable. The world that surrounds us is crushing. Not to mention, with the rise of awareness for mental health, I think it's not too much of a stretch to assume that the industry has noticed that and decided to bring in an essence of that to the main characters of the now in order to find relatability for the target demographic. Us. And even as we look around to other protagonists that clearly are not the Tom Holland protagonist on visuals alone, still somehow the characteristics are in there. There's a hint of Holland there. Or sometimes you can just see it in the fan casting choices of so many boys being pinned to Tom Holland anyway. Atlantis kinda doesn't work, but ask the fans and they want Tom Holland in there, just with a parting instead. Meet the Robinsons. Somehow I see him in there, after you give him a serious shave. Hotel Transylvania and Johnny again. It borrows just enough of the traits that people have fan casted him for a live action redo. They're not doing a live action redo. Mr. Peabody and Sherman, nerdy little kid. Strange World, doofy, youngish adult. It's gotten to the point where even when there are protagonists clearly built around other male celebrities in the acting sphere, still Tom Holland's general appeal has been associated with them. Roddy from Flushed Away, Rodney from Robots, even bloody Wade from Elemental. Somehow, you can see it. No one's safe from the blanket face statement of the Tom Holland face. Shaggy and Scoob was taken down, and even Mr. Generic logo face with Chris Pratt attached merges into a cast with Tom Holland instead. And it's not just the fans putting these pieces together in an extrapolated manner. Even insider casting directors have made the misstep of aiming outside of the Tom Holland range. We even gave Tom Holland's face to the role of Nathan Drake in the Uncharted movie, when the role clearly would fit someone older. It's like the Tom Holland face can be cast into anything. Hold on a minute. What if it's not Tom Holland's face being plugged onto these casting choices? It's that Tom Holland himself was chosen the first time in the first place to adhere to these established shaping standards. This isn't the Tom Holland face. It's just that Tom Holland has the linguini face. He too is just as much a victim to the bone structure as every animated character modeled to look this way. I mean, what are we even really looking at when we look at this variety of different faces? It's circular heads with a non-defined jawline. It's youthfulness or a lack of macho manisms. It's big quirky body parts like ears or a nose to come off as endearing and kind. A little weird, but not full-on Dumbo or Pinocchio. It's a design that remains, for all intents and purposes, pretty basic, really. You want a small, unintimidating character? This is pretty much your first draft. And in an era of animation where every 3D movie does just kind of look the same, it makes proper sense for all the characters to look like variants of each other, or like somewhat cousins. This isn't an intentional celebrity mimic. This is just another way of playing it safe. Screen tests and past success has shown this look of a character works well for a main protagonist, so why not just copy someone else's homework, but make it look a little different? This isn't a trend because we all have the same opinions on Tom Holland as Zendaya does, it's all just because it's generic and easy. We were only just breaching onto the idea of movies no longer having their own standoutish look in the 2000s, And it's only become more clear in recent years as everything is filled with nostalgia bait and reboots of old franchises. Movies aren't changing like they have done in the past, and this is all just a stylization issue. What we really need is variety in animation presentations. And what better way is there to put an end to the Tom Holland look than by switching up the hot stylization look for future animated movies to bench off of? Chances are, it already has been replaced. Onward and Luca likely being one of the last whimpers of this same design for a little while, as we head on into a new stylization. Our protagonists may remain feeble to overcome their biggest hurdles, but perhaps it's time for the Tom Holland look to finally move on and change, like the rest of the world is just about starting to do. Maybe the traits of our protagonist may just change again for this decade. As for what's next for the Tom Holland face, either his agent really needs to put in some work to give the guy a decent run that's not a Spider-Man gig, or maybe Holland should try out some new faces based off of all these variant ideas. What do you think looks better? Hiccup from How to Train Your Dragon 3, or do you think it will be more of a classic Linguini? Whatever the case, it was all just classic Corpo movie stuff, baby. Blue Sky Studios, you know them, famous for the likes of Ice Age and Ice Age and Ice Age and Ice Age and Ice Age. You know, maybe I'm starting to see how they fell apart already. Or is that the reason? I mean, this company is probably one of the biggest examples of an animation studio imploding before our very eyes. Who else was of the size and notoriety of Blue Sky that is now no longer active? So let's dig a little deeper into the full history of the studio with hindsight on our side to pinpoint any and all mistakes along the way that led the studio's legacy to be this. Remembered for one franchise now zombified elsewhere, a Robin Williams classic, a footnote of a late-stage production, and their biggest turnaround not even being finished with them. This is our video essay of how Blue Sky died. And it all began back in 1987. 1987? Yes, somehow 1987, as Blue Sky Studios was initially just a VFX studio, being the remains of a past studio that was shut down in the 80s, MAGI, or Mathematical Applications Group. And we're talking VFX in the 80s here. Particular references we come to are the likes of the original Tron. Hey, it's a little dated now, but awfully ahead of its time and fits the theme of visual computer work, so I see it. And with work being put together to replicate real-world physics and lighting renders, this new company strove into a new direction of animation. Their first commission being a logo flying over the ocean in front of a sunset. A classic, really. And before their first animated movie in 2002, yeah, you know the one. The studio was first honing their skills and their engine as they worked on the visual effects for TV adverts. Whether it was for Pepsi, Nicktoons' shape-shifting cartoon bumper, time release capsules, or the very first computer-animated M&Ms, it was clear that this was a time of just paying the bills, developing skills as they went. And you can see a clear trajectory of progress as they continued in this grind. They earned a Clio Award for advertising for a Braun commercial that was initially mistaken as live action because of the photorealism of the Razor. Oh, look at that Razor render. Yeah, Braun. And then from 1997, they were working on the films, or at least assisting in some of the animation work on the side of these live action hybrid films. Did you know they handled some of the stuff in Mouse Hunt, Alien Resurrection, and Fight Club? That's so cool. Blue Sky. But it was also at this point where we start to see some of those business swings taking place, as the very first squeak of 20th Century Fox comes into the picture right here, with their own VFX company, brilliantly named VIFX, acquiring most of the company's stock holdings, essentially force directing the company from as early as here. Now, to be fair, it was from this point that the likes of character animation was introduced for film collaborations. But it could be argued that right here, back in 1997, that the very first seeds of the studio's canon ending were first planted in. A whole 5 years before even officially starting on the big screen, and Blue Sky as a company had been strung up and controlled by a bigger company with their own ideals. A man in the clouds of this Blue Sky, if you will. Whilst at the same time, it leads one to question, why even accept an acquisition like this in the first place? What was the logic behind accepting a creative takeover? Was it out of desperation? Optimism? Naivety? The direction of the studio up to this point seemed to be a solid upward step-by-step of progress on the commercial sphere, but Perhaps that just wasn't the goal. Typically, and I say this as someone who was also personally part of a production company at one point, the commercial stuff is often just a means to an end, a source of income and experience. The real goal, perhaps, was movies the entire time once it seemed to become a reality. And it especially makes sense when you consider the staff's history with the original Tron and the direction that they would go on afterwards. And perhaps a merger with an older, similar studio seemed like a combination of heads that could make that dream a reality. Blue Sky had already been commissioned by the likes of big brands, so it's unlikely to imagine this merger as a result of hard times. But whether the full effect of a majority interest on the stakeholder side of things came with any anguish is hard to pinpoint. This is 1997 after all. Communications weren't exactly so transparent back then for specific details and opinions. That being said, two notable figures gained a boost in their roles from this. Richard Hollander of VIFX became the president of Combination, which is an interesting title, whilst David Brown, one of the main Magi employees and a marketing executive back in the day, who also has a resume in CBS and Fox, became CEO of this new Blue Sky / VIFX studio. Despite it not really being clear how or why these kind of business decisions would become the norm, the fact of the matter is, it does become the norm, especially for Blue Sky. And remember, the parent company to VIFX was 20th Century Fox themselves. So the big defining higher-up is already in the picture back here. And as for the success for this new duo studio, well, here's a quote from one of the digital artists about the circumstances. At the time of Star Trek IX, 20th Century Fox had acquired both VIFX and Blue Sky. We went under the combined name of Blue Sky / VIFX for about a year, but the companies were never actually integrated together in a meaningful way. Yep. Though not precisely a disaster of a merger, from the sounds of things, the two studios were still pretty notably separate. With one in Southern California and the other to the east in New York, each worked on their own separate projects, simply under the same umbrella name. And there are successes there, like Titanic being a big one around this time, but whilst VIFX was falling on harder times, Blue Sky had a side project up their sleeves. Starting way back in 1990, a little short film by the name of Bunny had been the passion project of Blue Sky founder Chris Wedge. Intending to demonstrate CGI animation in a short film, it would slowly go into production through the 90s, revolving around a rabbit widow who's irritated by a moth before being led into a heavenly glow, reuniting with her husband. Sounds dynamic and ambitious for early animation, and it was! Alongside a few notable people that helped bring it together, a newly graduated student in Carlos Saldana, and an official assignment from producer Nina Rappaport, 8 years from the start in 1998, and Bunny released to an Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. Just immediately, and unsurprisingly to hear, it was indeed Bunny that would be the fuel for Blue Sky going on to produce full-length theatrical CGI animated movies. No more anguishing over the likes of how to animate a reflective slime substance like flubber. What a gig that must have been. And so, as Blue Sky reached new heights, their partner studio fell to the wayside, to the point that 20th Century Fox specifically sold VIFX to another VFX house, Rhythm and Hues Studio. Ooh, okay, the people behind Life of Pi. Oh, they filed for bankruptcy 3 months later. And also the VFX artist protest outside the Oscars? And the VFX supervisor's speech was cut off by Jaws music for mentioning the studio? Oof, 2013. Maybe this 90s merger was cursed from the very start. But anyway, the Blue Sky side of things was kept by Fox as the potentially viable option. Although they too were considered to be on the chopping block due to VFX being under financial difficulties in general in like the early 2000s. Perhaps if Blue Sky was sold off and did its own thing from now, it could have done its own thing and still been here today. Maybe that was the mistake at the core of it all, before they'd even started. Anyway, they weren't sold off in 2000 because of a last-minute pitch to Fox regarding a whole new comedy feature film by the name of Ice Age. Yes, this is where it all went down. Finally! Who knew the studio had such a rich history before getting to day one? And all it took was the daring submission from the likes of Chris Wedge, producer Laurie Forte, and Christopher. It's Chris Meledandri stepping into the picture. How did he even get here? How long has he been here for? When did this happen? All my research up to this point doesn't even mention him as a relevant figure. Where did he come from? Why now? How here? Is this where it all goes wrong? I mean, Illumination is still going now. Illumination is thriving while Blue Skies died. Was it him? So, Chris Meledandri, born 1959. He was a 20th Century Fox guy from the mid-1990s, standing on the accolades of cool runnings to be trusted with producing financially successful family films. And soon enough, he was placed in charge of 20th Century Fox Animation, releasing Titan AE in 2000, a box office bomb so negative it almost got him fired, but it didn't. Is that the defining moment that destroyed Fox and Blue Sky? Debatable. The guy clearly knows how to make good money later down the line anyway. But his choices with this film at least led to Fox Animation Studios being closed off. Wow, it's not until you hear the full history of a single studio that you come to learn how many lived and died along the way. It was Chris Meledandri who actually led the Fox acquisition of Blue Sky Studios back in 1998, and he was the one who oversaw the creative and business operations of Blue Sky. For the past few years now, it has been him. Blue Sky is his story. And he was one of the bigwigs pushing for this little project called Ice Age that he would go on to executive produce. But it wasn't all sunshine just yet. As though they may have just been about to hit their cultural significant peak, behind closed doors, it was always a little tough on Blue Sky. As right beforehand, studio management apparently pressured staff to sell their remaining shares and options to Fox on the promise of continued employment on feature films. Yes, now Blue Sky Studios is wholly owned by Fox, and from here, the studio became merely a puppet to what the higher-ups say. And of all people, Chris Meledandri was probably the one with the most wiggle room. Selling your shares, probably the most classical business mistake you can make in the grand scheme of things. And it's a corporate takeover from a bigger bully way back in the early 2000s. You could very well say that this here was the moment that Blue Sky really died. Not just from the decision making of the real drivers from this point onwards, high and low, but on the ground level, it was at this point that the company was no longer a company just for its staff. When first founded, this studio was a sanctuary of the remains of Magi. A chance for creators to choose their own path and work together, even collecting shares in the company as they went. But here, it's officially removed from them. And what do you know, it was 20th Century Fox the whole time. One could go on to wonder just what could have happened to Blue Sky had this entire Fox acquisition not taken place here. Would they have returned to animations and commercial work that's still ongoing today? Or even assisting with other films, live action or animated, just as a smaller assistant rather than a frontrunner? Or heck, maybe another route could have still given them the theatrical front, but without the big wigs on their shoulders. Whatever the case or the argument, we are still behind the very peak of Blue Sky, so perhaps we can't exactly say that doom was seeded here necessarily. It's all down to the late stage decisions, right? And so, 2002, Ice Age 1 was made. Hey there, you're halfway through this video, so come along and subscribe if you haven't already to check out other video essays that we're gonna do regularly now. Alright, cheers! Now, there's a murmur of info here that says Fox terminated half of the staff anyway during Ice Age 1 and tried to sell the film and studio fearing a box office bomb, but I really can't find a viable source for it. So don't believe that info, but maybe hold on to it. You know, it adds great stakes. But then eventually, yes, it releases as a commercial and critical hit. The first feature film, and it gets a nomination for an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature in 2003. Just like Bunny, immediately awarded as competent and exemplary. And can you blame them? Ice Age 1 is a bona fide classic. Though the textures look a little prehistoric and the lighting is simplistic, this film is nothing less than iconic. With a memorable soundtrack, eternal characters, and a heartfelt story, not to mention a refreshingly brilliant premise and even some silent filmmaking in there. Easily, this is one of the very best movies that Blue Sky ever made, and perhaps that makes it one of their largest mistakes. While being a tall mountain of success right out of the door, it also acts as an overbearing shadow for the rest of the future of Blue Sky Studios, as we will quickly come to see over the next decade. But reveling in the good, this film in the early 2000s established Blue Sky Studios as one of the 3 major CGI animated movies, against Pixar and DreamWorks. That's about as high praise as you can realistically get. With Disney still doing 2D at this point, Blue Sky Sky are in 3rd place in the world at this point, and I certainly noticed them as a kid. However, we then look at how the studio directed its follow-up movies as the grind simply continues under Fox's full management. 2002, Ice Age 1. 3 years later, we get Robots, 2005. Another brilliant classic, creating a world of bionics rather than organics. It's a brilliant blend of kids' entertainment and adult humor, and notably quite a bit more daring than its Disney rival. And honestly, if this was the continued tone of movies going forward for Blue Sky, I think we would all be quite satisfied with the progress of the studio, finding its own dynamic voice with these deeply creative worlds and ideas. And also anti-capitalism snuck in there. Politics for kids right on the outset, just like A Bug's Life. Does Ice Age count as a climate change movie as well? I guess technically. Plus it's got the Robin Williams! What a goldmine of a character to play around with! But there's a catch. Despite Robots hitting #1 at the box office during its opening weekend and amassing a full total of $260 million worldwide, this was against an $80 million budget. And that $180 million profit is a notable step down from Ice Age's $383 million worldwide. Furthermore, Ice Age retained a 77% approval rating, and Robots was down to 64. Blasphemy if you ask me. Though, do you really think Chris Meledandri cares about the likes of critical responses? Either way, Robots never came back. Maybe it shouldn't. We don't need sequels out of every movie that does slightly well. A studio that defines itself by constantly spitting out sequels is obviously doomed from the start. Ice Age 2: The Meltdown. Perhaps this is where Blue Sky made their pivotal mistake, because by normalizing one sequel, you mobilize all the sequels. Ice Age 2 was once again a brilliant classic. The best case scenario for a sequel movie, and would go on to make an increased $667 million at the box office. This next installment is reported to be the 160th highest grossing film of all time now. It is the franchise that defines this studio, for better or for worse, but it's the in-betweens that really show what counts. Disney has the formula of one big musical and one big non-musical, so switching between old reliable and experimental originals just makes sense. So what's the next in-betweener? Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who. I mean, I'll be honest, this film is ugly. It's 2008, but without the Disney level budget here. So we can't exactly expect modern Illumination level lighting, but this movie to me just looks bleak. And all the grays really don't help the matter. This movie, I personally didn't notice as a child. Maybe it was because I was 12 and discovering the internet at the time, but the box office doesn't reflect that, thankfully. As with a stellar cast with Jim Carrey, Will Arnett, Seth Rogen, Amy Poehler, and Steve Carell. I'm seeing some similarities in this cast. But also, Selena Gomez and Joey King? This movie went on to make $298.5 million worldwide. Hey, that's an uptick from Robots. Though it does also have the helping hand of being a recognizable Dr. Seuss IP. And this upward trajectory only continues upwards nearer to the 2010s as Ice Age 3: Dawn of the Dinosaurs is just the next best, easiest pick for children to come in swaths in 2009. And it worked! Becoming the 3rd highest grossing film of 2009 against everything, and still standing at number 97, only replaced in animation by The Incredibles 2. 9 years later. Worldwide, it gathered $886.7 million in total. Massive for not even the 2010s yet. Billions were not on the table yet, but with a solid trilogy under the belt, that really should have been the end of it. This would go on to stay as the highest grossing Ice Age movie, and the true shadow that looms over Blue Sky Studios. But you know where this is going. With Fox at the helm and Chris 4 Despicable Me's and 2 Minion movies and counting Meledandri, of course they would continue the trend even with diminishing returns. Wait a minute. Where is Chris? What? He's not at Fox anymore? Well then where did he go? What could he possibly be up to? Illumination. Founded in 2007 and actively releasing movies from 2010, the guy who was once 1/3 of the first major Blue Sky pitch was now a direct rival, with all the financial accolades on his side. It might not have an effect right now, but it's an important marker to make when considering the wider context for the fall of Blue Sky Studios. But coming back to inside the company in a backwards way, you could say that Dawn of the Dinosaur was Blue Sky's ultimate doom. A tale to always be chasing from now on, whilst also the most financially successful, probably by taking the easy route of success. How very Illumination. The last influence of Meledandri, perhaps. But first, Rio! And again, what an absolute classic. Sure, it's only 72% on Rotten Tomatoes, but it raised $484 million in total worldwide gross. A solid venture that's piece by piece an expansion for the studio. Momentum was clearly going. What could possibly be going wrong? 2012, Ice Age 4 Continental Drift. And the continental drift of box office success is starting to slip. The movie itself was lackluster, boring, reusing the story beats of earlier films in a way that loses its creative charm and premise the franchise was founded on for the most corporate add-on to date. 37% on Rotten Tomatoes, but only a slap on the wrist, because the IP branding has strength. And that strength still gathered an audience of $877 million in value. Perhaps if they had made less money, they wouldn't have been so naive to run it again one more time later on. Maybe the mistake was not spotting the lesson here. Despite the profit, perhaps it was here that they truly lost their audience, when Ice Age no longer was the bastion of a great franchise. I remember I certainly felt that way at the time. Audiences didn't know about the quality they were paying for until it was already paid. And maybe losing the audience's trust at this point can be the explanation for the rapid decline that will follow from here. Ice Age by this point no longer became a figurehead for a creatively expansive franchise with great ideas, but an elongated drift of rehashing a tired and old world. But more so than that, the rate at which movies were coming out skyrocketed. I mean, they were always fairly regular with 2 to 3 year gaps, but 2011, 2012, 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, it was yearly at this point. Whilst at the same time, it seems as though the company were starting to step away from Ice Age. Epic came out with a massively different aesthetic that we would come to know from the studio's usual output, but at just $286 million worldwide, it's a notable drop-off in attention. All the while, rival animations came out that same summer with Pixar's Monsters University, as well as Illumination's Despicable Me 2. Ooh, it's Chris Meledandri in the other car. At a time when Blue Sky was floundering over its new experimental direction, and this is the likes they have to go up against. Rio 2 comes out next in 2014, another sequel movie to their next best successful franchise. Does it have the longevity to make a new Ice Age super franchise out of? Ish. Though it made almost $500 million, more than the first movie. Its approval rating was 48%, and Chris Meledandri isn't here anymore to not care about it. So, if an original can't work, and a sequel is dodgy, how's about another adaptation? That worked out fine last time. The Peanuts movie! I can't show you any of the footage because the rights owners are particularly sharky online. But just know it made $246 million. Not exactly crazy, especially for an already known IP. If only they allowed more external, free advertising in other forms that aren't just established media. Shame. And so, of course, come round to 2016 and it's not looking too grand. And after a repeating fourth sequel and every other example coming with diminishing returns, of course, Blue Sky Studios returns back to Ice Age for another sequel. This time at least a little less soulless? No, 18%. The worst the studio has ever seen, and chances are, this was at least the final nail in the coffin for the studio, figuratively. Was the mistake just the incompetent writing, or the very existence of the movie in the first place? It clearly comes from a notable decline, so you'd expect desperation would spur a stronger attempt. But alas, the audience weren't expecting much from last time, and were given even less than that. This would be the last Ice Age movie under Blue Sky Studios, an elongated whimper from what was once the third best in the industry. But the studio doesn't quite end there. Of all things, Ferdinand releases in 2017. Another adaptation with decent reviews of 71% and a worldwide gross of $269 million. Blue Sky seems to be in a constant state of just about doing well enough to justify continuing, just like Ice Age 4 encourages Ice Age 5, and no movie's being a catastrophic bomb. It's just been a dragged out whimper as long as it can be for the studio as a whole. So then how did we get here, considering there was a moment where the direction of the studio up to a certain point seemed to be a solid upward step-by-step of progress? But come to March 2019 and Disney got involved. Acquiring all of 20th Century Fox meant that Blue Sky was being inhaled as well. As perhaps it wasn't a single studio probably, but the head honcho of the whole thing handling things wrong. After all, they were the ones in control since the early 2000s. The heads of the studios would now be long replacements of the ones who founded the company in the 80s. And with the release of Spies in Disguise at the end of the year, Tom Holland and Will Smith, now the actors involved, at a 77% and a total gross of $171.6 million, this would be Blue Sky's biggest failure. Right before COVID, it was the final blow. Consumed by the studio that wasn't even in the 3D business when they started. And in April of 2021, it was officially shut down. So, how did Blue Sky die? You can blame it on a lot of things, but arguably there was no direct nosedive. It was more like a collection of small pivots in the wrong direction that ultimately faded the studio into obscurity. The Disney acquisition didn't bolster the studio. Lockdown shackled all of animation. Ice Age 5 was a quality bomb. The scrappy experimental pieces didn't pick up speed enough. Ice Age 4 soullessly lost its audience. Chris Meledandri became a rival to the studio. Fox acquired the entire studio and forced the creative direction, even taking shares from all of its staff. The studio accepted the first merger with VIFX in the 90s. They stopped producing commercial and assistant CGI work, and they drowned in the shadow of their biggest successes. Do you blame the people for accepting the first dodgy deal? Or do you blame the decades of poor decision-making with hindsight in mind? Or is it the ones who actually brought down the shutdown hammer? Whatever the case, it's an interesting case study to see such a scrappy animation studio struggling through hardships in a way that its rivals managed to commandeer through. The fight with Blue Skies was a fight, seemingly, the entire time. Not necessarily heaped in controversies, but just financial struggles, getting by just enough with each subsequent movie until it lost steam somewhere along the way. My personal argument would be that it was a consistent lapse in judgment on 20th Century Fox's front, commandeering the studio in all the wrong directions, whilst if there was anything close to a quick nosedive, I'd say it was Ice Age 4. They lost their audience then, and never really recovered. Whatever the case, despite its ending, Blue Sky Studios still holds some of the most magical and investing animated film experiences that can be celebrated and enjoyed, even if some of it was finished via another production company entirely, or crassly reanimated for all the more corporate shilling. That's just the industry, baby. And you can't expect a blue sky every day. Sometimes for the plants to grow, you need a little rain. And you need to keep the foxes out next time. Plus, the workers are still about. Scattered, but they're still out there somewhere. The soul and the magic and the talent is still there somewhere. It's never truly a loss, especially since we can buy them on DVD and replay them eternally. Ah, indie 3D animation. It sure has become quite the phenomenon in the last decade or so, and it's pretty easy to see why. Working in the field of animation is oftentimes a childhood dream for so many people, especially those who grew up questioning how exactly their favorite animated movies were made. While 3D animation traditionally was an extremely expensive process that could only be done by big-name studios like Pixar or DreamWorks, since it required big computers and a lot of rendering time, technology has advanced massively over the decades, and nowadays, the tiny cell phone you carry in your pocket just straight up outperforms the typical type of computer that Pixar used back in the 90s. That is, unless you're still rocking the old low-tech flip phone. I'm also trying to go a little bit more analog. Stops the addiction, you know? Now, of course, with the dramatic leap in tech and availability of free professional quality 3D animation tools such as Blender, Unity, Unreal Engine, alongside a drastic expansion in the accessibility of 3D animation tutorials and guides online via free services like YouTube, the animation scene has become so much more accessible than ever before. And the number of professional 3D animators and people employed in animation continues to grow grow every year. And this is of course great news for fans of animated films, as nowadays, generally more talent is working in the industry than ever before. But as with all things corporate, there are only so many jobs to go around, and the industry is extremely competitive, especially in these years with recent layoffs and studio shutdowns. Even though new animation studios continue to rise and old studios expand, animation is a limited field, and oftentimes the hardest thing for an aspiring animator to do is find a job. And the same is true of writers and other creators as well. And on the big scale, the companies behind these animated films can be toxic to work for as well, with us having records of studios like Disney and Pixar allegedly leveraging threat of layoff to pressure employees into long hours of crunch. That crunch has also been a continuing trend in the likes of Sony Pictures Animation, anything VFX related, especially in connection to Marvel, and even over at DreamWorks, they're outsourcing all the animation work for their latest movies. Animators, though they can fight like hell to keep their dream job, can't really stop the corporate machine from turning, and no matter how hard they fight, sometimes they are just simply let go, regardless of legendary status like being the one to revive the sequel to Pixar's Toy Story. After the release of Inside Out 2, which mind you, was a widely successful animated movie, Pixar reportedly laid off 14% of its staff, with plans for even more future layoffs as well. Like, this is just a continued trend and is absolutely baffling to me to see, since this movie did well. I mean, who is gonna make a successful future Pixar film without the animators? And don't even get me started on bloody well AI animation work. And you gotta imagine, if these layoffs are coming after the creation of a super successful film, one of the biggest animated movies of last year, I can't imagine what happens after the release of an animated movie that bombs. For example, the recent box office disaster that was Disney's Wish. I can't fathom what morale must have been like in that office when the online backlash of that movie came about, and the executives certainly couldn't have been happy about it. But even still, animation is still a dream job, and to the point of this whole video, the field of 3D animation has dramatically expanded in scale from belonging to just a few mismanaged corporations to something much more democratized. While creating premium content in film and TV is expensive and competitive, creating content for platforms like YouTube has roughly no real barrier to entry other than time, skill, computer power, and internet access. Oh, and I guess electricity bills, sure. Kinda hard to animate without being able to turn the lights on. I don't know how good the food breaks are for a corporate animation job, but I presume it's not that great either, so I guess you have to pay for your own food and water too. But with the entire landscape of animation completely changing before our very eyes in practically 3 decades, and especially seeing the likes of giant corpo animation spheres really going through the ringer, perhaps maybe now more than ever, we could actually go on to say that this is the rise of indie animation. YouTube in particular has become the space for these kind of indie projects to shine, because though creating premium quality content is possible on this platform, really, any video made in any way can blow up as long as it resonates with people. I mean, look at me. I just started off by making an analysis of a Pikmin trailer 12, 13 years ago. And somehow it's brought me here. I don't know how I got here either. This is why, and yes, I am about to say this is a real sentence, a traditionally crafted show such as The Amazing Digital Circus, lovingly put together as it is, can blow up on the platform alongside the bombastic Gmod insanity that is Skibidi Toilet. That's still getting a Michael Bay movie adaptation, by the way. Both of these projects fall under different parts of the indie animation umbrella and exist outside of the scope of something that would be tried by a typical mainstream animation studio. Still, both shows have found different audiences in a way only possible on a platform like YouTube. Creating something like these projects is a risk that most major studios would be unwilling to take, especially when major streaming services are known for shuttering serialized 2D animated projects like Infinity Train or The Owl House. Even shows attached to famous creatives like Alex Hirsch of Gravity Falls fame aren't safe since Netflix cancelled Inside Job. Actually, I kinda get that one. The show was all about the shadow government, and there's no way Netflix's higher-ups aren't part of the Illuminati. Inside Job was probably just exposing too many of their secrets, you know? Inside Job was an inside job, is what I'm trying to say here. So when beloved shows like these get canned, how can something like Skibidi Toilet expand to become a global phenomenon and apparently get a movie adaptation? Because of course it can! That said, Skibidi Toilet, actually isn't doing something particularly new, and I'm kinda sick of looking at it. Gmod and Source Filmmaker Animation have existed for a very long time, and these sort of low-budget machinima shows aren't even a particularly new direction for indie anyway. Speaking of machinima, companies like the recently resurrected Rooster Teeth pioneered this model well before YouTube. Starting out in the early 2000s with low-budget machinima shows like Red vs. Blue, and eventually putting out more serialized animated shows like Ruby, Rooster Teeth started from a small team consisting of no animators and worked themselves up to being a large animation company that was eventually big enough to be bought by Warner Brothers. They made it into the mainstream. Oh yeah, and then they were promptly driven into the ground under poor management by Warner Brothers, but hey, Warner Brothers hates animation, I guess. But it really is a marker of how animation is going in these times. I think a genuine part of this kind of cycle is that indie animation is able to simply take risks that major studios cannot, given the lack of overhead. And this, I truly believe, is what makes the indie scene so exciting for so many people. It's actually original. Indies are what have been driving the recent rise of adult animation and the perceived target demographic of 3D animation shifting away from being just for kids, while yes, on occasion, a major studio will put together something brilliant and well-received with an adult audience in mind, for example Netflix and Riot's Arcane, but this is the exception rather than the rule. Want to make a Western show with Pokemon-like robots? You'll have to go through a ton of pitching to even be considered by a major animated studio, and you might have some of your ideas pilfered or stolen during the rejection process. In that case, why not just make it yourself? Bam! Mech West exists. This is a genuine indie show you can see on YouTube for free right now. It's nice, classical, family-friendly, and surprisingly, not made by a mainstream studio. Want to make a zany and colorful show based on classic liminal computing that is aimed at an adult audience and full of dark undertones? You know what I'm describing here. It's the amazing digital circus getting you covered right off the bat on that. We love technological existential dread, sprinkled in with all sorts of lighthearted goofiness. It might be on Netflix now, but that show still stands as positively indie. And in fact, this deal could be the biggest marker of where indie can go from here. Rather than being absorbed by a massive mainstream studio, they can instead make a deal for platforming themselves and running off on their own rules, because indie is where a lot of the power is now. And they don't have to go Netflix. You've got the sister show from Glitch Productions in the form of Murder Drones. Want a dark, twisted, dystopian film noir-inspired world with robots and monsters? Autodale is for you. On the 2D front as well, there are shows like Hell of a Boss that exist. Again, another serialized indie show aimed at an adult audience. Have I seen some pretty young kids with Has-Been Hotel or Hell of a Boss merchandise who have seen the show? Yes. Is that incredibly age-inappropriate and possibly a crime against humanity? Also yes. But this isn't the fault of indie animation, just a growing pain of animation expanding beyond being seen as just for kids. It's the parents' faults. Even 3D shows made by big studios aimed at children are generally getting darker. A sort of fan-favorite example of this is some of the arcs from Lucasfilms' Clone Wars, which deals with incredibly heavy themes and politics. So, what's the similarity here between all of these different indie shows? Why is the indie scene expanding so dramatically? Well, I think it really comes down to a switch in distribution methods. Indies, as mentioned earlier, have a home on open and accessible platforms like YouTube. It's the reason that places like Newgrounds used to be the home of this stuff, even though most of the interesting content has shifted over to YouTube in the modern day. These free platforms make the barrier to entry really low, which means it's easy to build an audience and also build up your own skills without needing the formalities of it all. However, on YouTube, you're in some ways competing against every other video on the platform, debatably. While some truly exceptional indies can do massive numbers thanks to the algorithm really promoting it, see for example the explosive success of Amazing Digital Circus, and then there are some other shows that get bogged down by YouTube's competitive nature. Maybe that's something worth exploring for another video someday, why some indies, don't have as much attention as they should. I've got some thoughts about it for sure. While there are tons of barriers that prevent more indies from popping off, and the biggest one is exposure, major studios have the benefit at least of tons of media attention alongside contracts with distributors like streaming platforms and movie theaters that simply indies have to do all on their own somehow. In fact, It's this legal corporate management side of things that may very well be the hardest part of being indie, where things are truly DIY. Somebody involved ends up being basically a small business owner, whether they like it or not. Again, look at me. I just wanted to talk about bloody well Nintendo games, and now I've had to create a limited company to make my taxes not crazy extortionate. It's just how life goes sometimes. Indies tend to prefer the sustainable serialized TV show model with multiple installments instead of the big budget single release model as well, and there are a few reasons for this. First, it's relatively easy to publish content for free on platforms like YouTube or on your own website compared to having a full release in theaters or streaming platforms, which require negotiations with the theaters or platforms themselves on some level. You know, they aren't going to host you on their platform if they don't know you exist. On top of this, releasing multiple shorter length episodes on YouTube can be far more sustainable for a small studio anyway, since it's consistent content to come back to for subscribers rather than one big mega video most people will just click away from. It's all about building an audience using the algorithm and your viewers. You gotta hack their brains, you see? There's a real ebb and flow that the likes of the big animation bigwigs don't quite have to deal with. Sort of. I mean, they still have to have, like, debuts, one movie out and hope it gets some buzz like Pixar did. But still. And this isn't even to say that indie shows can't be in theaters. In fact, there have been multiple indies shown on the big screen before. Ruby made it to theaters multiple times, for example, though that happened particularly through its studio merger with Warner Brothers, which I guess kind of just makes it mainstream corpo anyway, but you get the idea. And what we've seen in several years past is the acquisition of an indie studio by a corporation ends up really dragging the indie into the world of, well, corporate. And this new overhead then typically strips them of the benefit of being an indie in the first place. Maybe they might get more funding, but now they have their corporate owner to think about, which is why more recently, indies have really cracked the code for how to generate a ton of exposure and revenue without having to rely on getting bought out and controlled. They found that corporate distribution is great, but not outright ownership. To that end, we see shows like Amazing Digital Circus on Netflix and Has Been Hotel on Amazon Prime. You know, these shows get increased exposure there, and the streaming company knows what they're getting into by providing simple access to this material. If you're looking to put Has Been Hotel on your platform, you know exactly what you're getting into, and your acquisition of the rights to stream this show isn't going to change anything about what the show itself is or isn't without the consent of the creators. Unless, you know, they'd sign some dodgy contract. At the end of the day though, the easiest way for an indie show to retain the essence of what has made a huge uptick in indie success recently is to stay indie. And to stay true to the vision of the creators. Oh yeah, and be good content too, you know, that's fine. Being high quality really helps. But regardless of what path brought them to the animation field, there's a real solid chance that most animators started out independent anyway. Maybe they got their start making fan animations of some of your favorite shows or games. Or maybe they scribbled down their ideas on a napkin, building a world from stains and then putting the rest together brick by brick, pose by pose. Maybe instead they were inspired by studying how things move on the screen and in real life, or how graphics evolved over time. Maybe these dreamers were hooked by the behind the scenes videos packaged with the DVD releases of big budget Pixar or DreamWorks films. Maybe they worked hard into getting into one of these companies before going their separate ways and striking their own path. Maybe they've always had a natural talent for storytelling and want their stories to be heard. Or perhaps they just started off making a bunch of random crap when they were 13 on Newgrounds. There are so many reasons people get inspired, get into animation and make the things they want to make. But no matter what, people had to start from somewhere. And if they're publishing the things they're making as they go along, the place for publishing that so it can be seen is YouTube and other social medias, the likes of which simply didn't exist in the 90s. And considering we're now seeing all sorts of these major bigwigs having massive business layoffs and problems, maybe pulling back and sticking to the simplistic, making stuff for yourself with the accessible tools you have within you, could be rising to the point that it even rivals the bigwigs these animators were once heralding they wanted to become in their dream scenario. Whether it becomes a full rejection of the mainstream, reaching up to their heights to be swallowed in like the past, or simply making good deals and keeping them hands off, I genuinely think we're coming to a real boom of indie animation, from both a business perspective and from just the refreshing nature of seeing original stories at a time when corporations want to be so risk-averse that all they can come out with is remakes and sequels. I think we're only at the cusp of indie animation having its real soul, and it's a story that's been going for almost to the anniversary 3 full decades. 1995 to 2025. And it is the democratization of content making on YouTube that truly is the reason we are getting many more indie surprises in the years to come. Sure, for every successful indie, there's probably a failing one too. One that never quite gets off the ground or is just buried by the algorithm. That said, YouTube still is a key platform that helps indies expand the animation medium's limitless potential for storytelling. In fact, I'd probably say it is the key that has unlocked the indie revelation that we've experienced over the past decade and are experiencing proper now. And I, for one, am so excited to see where it goes from here. Every time Disney pisses me off, I can have a breath of fresh air when something indie comes out and shows how to do it right for once. Ooh, politics. Everybody loves talking politics. And today we're talking about politics specifically aimed for kids. Am I kicking the beehive today? I think I'm kicking the bee's nest today. You've heard the angry rambles before. Why the hell are there politics in my kids' movie? This is absolute poison. How dare they introduce concepts that are clearly pushing for an agenda? It's only a recent thing anyway, based on the recent most latest political administration, or one back at most. There's never been politics in animation the entire time, surely not. No, it's only politics when we're talking about a minority being mentioned. Politics is the existence of someone not like me. That's typically the conversation you hear on the internet. I think I've covered most of those points pretty quickly and vaguely. But you see, here's the thing. That's not what we're talking about today. The fact of the matter is, politics is pretty much baked into most stories there are to consume. And if people don't think it's been a thing in the good old days, they just weren't paying attention. So what's the difference? Why is it some political topics get people all up in arms and others seem to go completely under the radar? There is a difference, and that's what we're talking about today. Not the controversial stuff of, oh, how could they do this? Also, because I disagree on how could they do this. But namely, how do you do politics well for kids to consume in an appropriate way, whilst also not enraging the general public? Because the fact of the matter is, it's done effectively more times than it isn't. From early animated classics like Pixar's The Incredibles or DreamWorks' Shrek to high-quality recent releases like Hasbro's Transformers 1, politics are an integral point of the main plot of many beloved animated films. So much so that I'd argue these films would not work at all if separated from their political themes. That said, politics are, if nothing else, divisive, and as a result, the inclusion of political ideas in media is also divisive. For screenwriters, the inclusion of political themes, particularly contemporary political ideas with a modern real impact, can be a gamble that risks alienating a portion of their audience, and this is even true in media aimed at adults. There is certainly nuance behind the inclusion of political themes, especially what themes to include and why. This is especially true in any sort of media that includes children as a large part of their intended audience. Animation is designed to have a mass appeal. Despite this, many widely celebrated animated films and TV shows manage to include these divisive political themes whilst also still being widely accepted by their all-age audiences, despite the inherent risk. By taking a deep look at a few of these acclaimed animated projects and analyzing their use of politics, we could observe the mechanics behind their successful political messaging. But let's start by taking a look at one of the most recent examples, Transformers 1. This movie, though it may have underperformed at the box office, was beloved for its strong, politically focused world building. The film focuses on a robot society that lives on the fictional planet of Cybertron, with the obvious classism between the bots on the planet serving as the driving factor of the film's conflict. The robot inhabitants of this world are split into two different classes, the ruling class of Transformers 1 and the working class of miners.
Are those miners in the race?
Miners!
Whoa, hold on there, buddy. These miners are cogless, which means that unlike their elite counterpart, they are much smaller, less powerful, and unable to turn into a vehicle mode since they are born without a transformation cog. Transformers 1's political messaging is at the heart of its world building, and the movie is incredibly honest and direct with how it presents its political themes. Throughout the film, 4 cogless miner bots led by the duo who would later become Optimus Prime and Megatron uncover the truth that not only their society had been overtaken by an autocratic coup, but that the caste system that defines their world is artificial. Throughout their adventure, they discover that all sentient Cybertronians are born with cogs, and that Sentinel Prime, the corrupt leader of the ruling Transformer class, had the miners' cogs removed, strengthening the grip on the planet. Through their resistance against this corporate autocracy, the friendship between resistant fighters Optimus and Megatron is shattered, with this divide being formed from the rift between both of their differing views for the future of Cybertron and the stark contrast between their methods on how to achieve those visions. Transformers 1 is functionally a story about revolution, and it features a class revolt of the poor against their wealthy masters. It's not too unlike real-world historical events such as the French Revolution, whilst also drawing a few contemporary real-life parallels as well, though I'll leave those up to your interpretation. And mind you, this movie has a PG rating, though it does have a few instances of language that push it above the typical fully family-friendly animated affair. I'd still say it's a welcome experience for all ages, and with it being a more recent film, during the times of public uproar around political topics, I think this movie comes off as a lot less subtle, whilst covering a political theme that's not too personal and specific. But we're gonna go down the rabbit hole a bit more. And I think one of the main things that makes this not controversial, despite being so unsubtle, especially during these times, is because its political storytelling are true to the fictional world first and foremost. This is to say, the politics aren't being artificially inserted in, and so they're ingrained into the movie such that they are inseparable from the narrative. I think this is the first takeaway that we can have in regards to how to do politics well in animated movies without causing a fuss. This movie's successful inclusion of complex political ideas hinges on their realism to the fantasy setting it's based in. Whether it was the direct intention of the filmmakers for their film to be political, or just a consequence of the story they wanted to tell, Transformers 1 lands squarely as an anti-authoritative narrative, whilst the ideas are diegetic, meaning they are occurring within the context of the story and are able to be experienced by the characters themselves. There's nothing about the political messaging in this movie that feels inauthentic or forced, because it's so important to the lives of the characters themselves. And in a sense, you can put a barrier up and say, that's their problem, that doesn't necessarily reflect our problems. Another movie that does diegetic politics really well is Pixar's first Incredibles movie from 2004. Despite being made 20 years before Transformers 1, it handles the same sort of complex political themes as a vital part of its world building. While a lot of the political nuance of this movie might be lost on a kid watching who is just here for the superheroes, just like a kid watching Transformers 1 for the first time who might just be there for the cool car robots fighting, it's still very apparently there and very neatly woven into the narrative. It's funny, The Incredibles in particular is a very interesting political film, because when you think about it, it simultaneously presents both traditionally liberal and conservative themes within its narrative, and yet is widely accepted without much controversy. This is probably because, just like with Transformers 1, the politics are derived from the story being told rather than being artificially inserted. The core message of The Incredibles is honestly pretty strange compared to the normal messaging in movies aimed at kids. Instead of being a typical follow your dreams, anyone can do anything sort of story, the film's main message is about how exceptional people shouldn't be held back, and should not just be enabled, but encouraged to use their talents to stand out as above average, as the success of these incredible individuals helps the average person thrive. Which, honestly, is fair enough in this universe. I have no idea how they deal with supervillains without supers, you know? Who's gonna stop villains without them? The police? Just one super with powers that outclasses the cops, and I'm not sure that's gonna work very well. This, when looked at with a real-life political lens, is honestly an unexpectedly conservative message for a movie like this, mirroring rhetoric used to support policies such as trickle-down economics and tax cuts on the wealthy. On top of this, though the film does have an antagonist in the form of Syndrome, and trust me, we'll get to him in a minute, the true force working against the supers in this movie isn't a supervillain, but rather government overreach. By the government banning superhero activity and making the secret identities of supers their only identities, the supers essentially have their freedom of expression taken away and are made vulnerable. In seeking that better life for themselves, where they could use their superpowers and live their lives to the fullest, they fall victim to Syndrome's sinister plot. This is once again along the same lines as modern-day conservative talking points. At the same time, this movie presents more liberal ideas as well. Though the family of supers we follow in the movie long for the glory days, back when life was better pre-Super Relocation Act, Bob is presented as stuck in a corporate nightmare, stuck in a miserable commute, and stuffed into a tiny white cubicle. Bob Parr is forced to secretly navigate helping people through an insurance company designed to deny people's claims as much as possible.
Denied? You're denying my claim?
And a reminder, this movie came out in 2004. November 5th, 2004. They were exactly 20 years and 1 month prior to certain events. I am stunned. Despite the not-so-functional insurance company driven by the shareholders and corporate greed, and despite similarities to current real-world events, the creators behind The Incredibles aren't interested in these political ideas just for the politics of it. Instead, they use them specifically to further Bob's arc. Bob is stuck in a place where he not only can't stand out and help people, but he's part of a corporate system that encourages day-to-day villainy. It's a perjury for him that when he is offered a chance to break away from through a return to superwork, he immediately springs from. And at the same time, the film's villain Syndrome builds his plan around taking away what makes superheroes super. Even though his methods are extreme, radical, and evil, his end goal is, in some warped sense, equality.
And when everyone's super, no one will be.
But it's not an uplifting equality as much as a mirror of the corporately bland stagnation that was shown earlier in the film, a stagnant world where nobody is special. That said, at the end of the day, selling gadgets to the general public that make superpowers affordable is probably not a truly evil action on its own. What's evil is just the path that Syndrome took to get there, and then he wants to get loads of money off of it, you know, just classic corporate greed. Like, it might be stupid, but I wouldn't say it's inherently wrong to do that. That said, it doesn't really matter because it's not like anyone's going to be able to afford it anyway, with Bob's insurance company denying everyone's claims. The politics of this movie are front and center. Political ideas are baked into the very foundation of the Incredibles storyline at every twist and turn, and yet the film is successful, well-regarded, and relatively non-controversial. So what gives? Well, also part of it is the fact that it came from 2004. I don't think the general public were that uproariously, wanting to riot back in those days. But also, The Incredibles works because it doesn't really have a perceived agenda outside of the core message that great people should be allowed to be great. And even then, the politics of this film do not exist to bolster any real-world political cause, but rather just exist to service the story. Though there are clear comparisons to real-world situations, there is no real government overreach in America in the form of a superhero relocation act. But in the world of The Incredibles, this is a very real political idea and people respond accordingly. They can debate the fictional circumstance and still remain in character. Politics is designed to make the fantasy world more real for the audience by being true to the lives of the people that inhabit it. As far as politics goes, artificially slipping stuff under the radar to try to influence people is dumb, and even if you're not actively doing it, the problem is people's perception of you doing it. It kind of becomes a second degree of separation of people can get angry at the idea of it rather than you actually doing it. you know? And that is where people say there is a problem in doing politics for kids, to the point that they don't even notice the politics in other movies if it makes logical sense purely for the storyline. It's the element of being non-diegetic and feeling out of place in the world of the story, pulling the audience out of the fantasy with their inclusion, that things get a little bit dicey for people. That said, a dose of real politics can strengthen the message of a film if they're a part of the world of the film. But even then, some political comparisons can actually happen entirely by accident. Take, for example, DreamWorks' Shrek. It's a pretty easy movie to draw modern political parallels with. Again though, 2001, so maybe that's the degree of separation there. And no, I'm not talking about the unhinged Shrek memes showing him kissing modern political figures. I'm talking about the actual movies here. Because looking back on it, a major event in the original Shrek is the eviction, or rather deportation, of fairy tale creatures into Shrek's swamp. This is used as a narrative device, but despite similarities to modern hot-button political issues, Shrek never draws the ire of real-world audiences over this plot point. It's not like they've never heard of deportation before in 2001, you know? Now, the fact that this doesn't get a problem beyond the time period it came out in is probably since the goal of the scene is not to say something about a real-life issue. Instead, it's just trying to kickstart Shrek's arc by having a bunch of people show up in his swamp and break his tranquility. The politics is kind of in the background if you want to read into it more. The Incredibles doesn't have to spend a moment of its runtime babying the struggles of the Parr family for kids or explaining its politics. The stakes are very real for our superhero family. The scene where Helen explains to her children just how dangerous the bad guys are, for example, works because it's not designed to tell younger audiences how dangerous they are, it's designed as a realistic interaction between a mother and her two children in a dangerous situation. And even when we come to a modern example of The Incredibles with their sequel, they try to bake in a topic that could get people up in arms if you are the weakest possible person, in that the protagonist hero became Elastigirl, she was seen more favorably as less destructive. And also it creates a nice new conflict for Bob to actually handle the parenting. Though at the same time, perhaps you can see some of the more risk-adverse decisions of the modern day in this political climate, as so much of the nuance and political details were very much squashed away, turning it into a more generic superhero movie. Again, showing how some elements and layers of politics can really embellish a movie and take it from good to great, and great to grand. Transformers 1 shows instead of tells with plenty of its political themes as well. General audiences don't necessarily like or dislike politics, but they for sure do not like being talked down to. And the movie never takes the time to point out how clever it is for using real-world political messagings because the characters themselves have no reason to know anything about our real world. They're giant space robot alien people. Other times, it seems to be the unfortunate case of picking which political themes to cover, as some are simply more heated than others. It's interesting. I'd be curious to know how a modern Bugs Life movie would do, considering that movie's political themes is very starkly, again, going against that authoritarian reign, whilst the theme that comes out of Transformers 1 could clearly be one that gets certain people all up and riled about it, in a similar way that you would see a Bugs Life perhaps doing in the modern age. It's a similar example. It unfortunately seems to be the case that if you cover topics that are a lot more personal and character-based, people will just assume that you've inserted that character into a story that otherwise doesn't make sense. And if you want to tell a story about someone being against the status quo, the way you do it is by subtle layering. If we're not talking about animation before, that can come in the form of what The Matrix is an allegory for, as well as the X-Men, as well as a million examples of someone being seen as outcast. A classic story trope that can perhaps reflect those same political themes in a way that goes over certain people's heads. Because at the end of the day, politics has always been ingrained in most stories there are to see, as for there to be a villain, there has to be a contrasting opinion that makes two characters clash. So many stories are overthrowing someone taking too much power, or banding together with your community to achieve some goal. But the times it really works best is when such politics is baked into the fiction of the world in a way that doesn't pull people out of it. Because the moment people remember the real world, the moment they start getting angry, apparently. At the end of the day, is it good to do politics for kids? Well, yeah, because it's always been there in the first place. There's just sometimes been better execution over the years that's managed to dodge controversy along the way. What matters most is authenticity, and the best part really is it's all art anyway, and art is fully up to interpretation. You can delete the politics if you want to, or you can add it yourself as well. Whew, we'll find out how much I splice up this recording in the edit, but for now, I'd best end it off there. My name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this little essay. Do tell us your thoughts on politics for kids. Oh boy, that is a spicy prompt for a comment section. How about give me good examples of politics you've seen in movies? Let's dive more into how it's done well in the past. The Disney live-action remake. Ugh, we love to hate them. Because we do. While it may be seen as simple family entertainment with no unneeded complexity added to it from the perspective of maybe the average normie viewer, the matter of the fact is, they're right. It is simple, and it is uncomplex, and that's bland. Oh, thank you, Disney. You've gifted me with a rehashed story you've already told me before in a far inferior manner that somehow is more legitimate this time because it's not in the form of animation. As if to insinuate that cinema is only real when it's in live action, but also worse. Cheers! Thanks, Disney. I'm glad we have been able to systematically prove to you that we would rather have movies that have been reheated in the microwave into a blended mush rather than enjoy a new taste of something with a sprinkling of imagination to it. Only the best request from the Studio of Wonder. But do you know what bothers me the most about Disney live-action remakes? There's a lot of contenders, to be honest. It's not the fact we've been force-fed them for 10 years now with no real stop indicators in sight. It's not the fact that we can all but guarantee absolutely every animated Disney film of note will be getting an adaptation of some kind, apart from the ones we would probably really come to respect a revival from. It's not the fact that these movies perform spectacularly well almost every single time, as a mindless audience always manifests around these products to consume and then chuck away like the creators that built it. It's not the fact that this does seem to be a pasting over of animation into a format that is more socially acceptable as a form of storytelling, somehow in 2025. And it's not the fact that Disney's antics have been so successful that it's influencing other studios to consider the same, thus marking us down for another 10 years of this schmuck most likely. No, even putting down my most cynical side, the part of this epidemic that really bothers me when I get down to thinking about it is how much potential there is in the format that's just being completely wasted. I can get over the fact that they are regurgitating titles, and I can get over the fact that it's recast with human actors. But with Disney bringing up all of their biggest IPs all at once over the same-ish period of time, upheld by a legacy of unrivaled creativity and imagination, it seems almost baffling to me that Disney have never really considered doing more with what is clearly a lot of work to reconstruct from the ground up again. This is the studio that is metaphorically reproducing worlds again with modern technologies and modern casts with recognizable faces welded together to these big IP brand characters, and to use them like a single-use consumable seems to be both wasteful and foolish, right? I have a Disney live-action pitch, one that sweeps across the board and can be applied to any and all past remakes we've seen beyond just, what if we made Jungle Book adapt the Jungle Book 2 DVD sequel? Although also, let's be honest, if Disney has some free storylines lingering around, makes a lot of sense to just adapt some pre-built sequels, right? Just make them better next time. Well, of course, it can't be quite that simple, as after all, these are the famous Disney straight-to-DVD sequels. They are specifically noted to being essentially, like, officially mandated knockoffs of Disney's own work. Huh, I guess maybe that's been the studio's MO for longer than I realized, It's here you'd usually find Robin Williams is the genie, not played by Robin Williams. So, of course, we don't want exactly that, but clearly what we do need is more. But more done, I don't know, actually faithfully? And I don't mean faithfully in the manner of perfectly replicating shot by shot the work you've already done in animation, but in telling good, magical stories fresh off of a new page. What I want is originality in a live action remake. Is that too much to ask for? I want new territory being opened up in a world that we're forced to revisit. A new direction, an exploration outwards to show us far more than anything we've seen beforehand. with a leap of faith and a talented team at its core willing to pour their heart and soul into the work. Much like the source material of all the remakes we're being bombarded with. But how do you do it? You can't just look up to the biggest and most successful storytelling corporation in the world and expect them to be able to just create some of the best stories in the movie literature world. Again, that'd be absurd to have the highest expectations for the biggest dog in the race. How dare we ask for more from the company that stopped feeding us quality meals and craves only the microwave? And while I could slap together some weird speculative sequel idea for each individual remake, and its new fleshy world to be expanded, let's do things a little more the Disney way. Simplified, easy to understand, and takes maybe a little less effort. And what better way to lightning rod us into a direction than to look towards the live-action Stitch for some inspiration as the figurehead of the biggest missed opportunity. Yep, even though the movie's not even come out yet, I already have a complaint. Very impressive, I know, I'll take my award after the video. But you see, the basic gist of the idea I have for these already stale live-action remakes is one that we've already seen with Stitch's marketing. Or at least, the original Stitch marketing. I mean, just look at this.
The tradition.
Hey, that's not Simba.
Back in the early 2000s, the Disney filmography was a cinematic universe. Before the times of cinematic universes. Now, I know that sounds bad to insinuate a MCU pitch in the decade of the 2020s, but look at how it's already been managed, both in the highs and the lows. In the lead up to the release of Lilo and Stitch, the original, we were blessed with the occasional excerpt of Stitch invading on the universes of past Disney classics, incorporating in his own sense of chaos that both highlighted some of Disney's most iconic moments, as well as enriched us to this yet-to-be-known character to be established before our very eyes. It was a fun and quirky stunt. And it worked so very well. Skip ahead 15 years later and we could see the same idea completely dropping the ball. This time in Wreck-It Ralph's corporate sequel, Ralph Breaks the Internet. Now we have everyone all smushed together and it just feels off, right? Like, this doesn't feel like a genuine expansion of any character's world and is very much just a quota. From a movie that is chock full of, hey, look at this, relatable because recognizable, this is just another manifestation of it. And yet, this is probably the most iconic part of the movie. Probably from the marketing department going crazy with this one scene, since they do have the foresight to see at least something here being somewhat interesting in an otherwise shallow world. And so, skip forwards another 7 years, oh my god, somehow it's been 7 years already, and we're back to Stitch. We're back to the marketing department, and Stitch has an open goal of an opportunity. What if live-action Stitch invaded the Disney movies again? But not the original Disney movies, the live-action adaptation of those same Disney movies. Look, we have a live-action Beauty and the Beast, we have a live-action Aladdin, and even if it's a struggle to bring back such cast members as Will Smith and Emma Watson, I mean, sure, I can get the argument, but look, we even have The Lion King adapted, and that one, literally, that does not need a returning human cast member. It's all animation, ironically, for a live-action remake. And yet, it doesn't exist. And it's not going to exist, probably, because Disney of the 2020s has done something a little bit differently. Gone are the days of the real early 2000s and probably the 2018 blip, and Marvel as a whole has apparently thrown Disney off on trying to touch on the whole idea, because Stitch made a motion towards the idea, somewhat. It was only The Lion King, and it was this. That is the same idea of Stitch being the centerpiece of the Circle of Life, but it's not in universe, despite it literally just being a CGI background change that is needed. And it's not even the arms of Rafiki doing so, it's Lilo, on the beach as part of their own bubble of a universe. Petrified to even insinuate extending ideas further, unless regulated to a PNG at most. A collab poster that doesn't even include a main character. This is the current state of Disney's marketing department. Their blasé and dynamic choices for the sake of a gag that both enriches and highlights both parties is long gone for a shallow shell of what it once was, as if reflecting the very remakes they're set to represent. And that's such a colossal shame, because any hint of new storytelling told on top of these already set remake set pieces seems like a no-brainer for fan service, given that the end result is actually something of high quality. And I say that particular last addendum to the message because that next brings us to Mufasa the Lion King. This could have been everything. The way I see it, this movie could well have been the experiment that leads into what I would have hoped to come next. Going into it, it already has some pitfalls for what I would hope to see. How typical that they made a sequel out of the only Disney remake that doesn't require a live-action cast to actually return. But a full month later, and we can see the full extent to how badly this movie flopped in a certain sense. Looking at the reviews, it has the classic remake statistics. An uncaring audience rates it around the 80s and 90s, whilst the critics hail it as a mid-50s at best. And I agree. If this is the state of modern Disney animation, doing an original story, and it literally exactly is, then this is just so poor. It's a case study, to be sure. It's not like they didn't try. I mean, Lin-Manuel Miranda was involved in this one, skipping out on Moana 2, but what we got instead was both movies' discography being forgettable. Or if you do remember the songs, it's for all the wrong reasons. Why the hell did the Mufasa songs experiment so strongly in the wrong direction? How did no one at Disney veto My Brother and Bye Bye? Like, this is child's play stuff. And it's not just the music. The actual writing is emblematic of how far Disney has trounced on their writers. Because this does not have the Disney seal of quality that upheld the company for all these decades. And it's not like those same writers aren't around now. They're probably just redispersed. Probably over to another company that's not been shilling it in for decades. Putting this up against the rest of the recent original plotlines from Disney, and it's clear to see that this is the real heart of the problem. The good writers at Disney are lost, and modern day Disney doesn't seem to have both the guts to push out the boundary when making yet another regurgitation, nor the talent anymore to make something grand and original if they tried. And that's staggering from literally the biggest studio in the business. So, can we meet in the middle? Please stop feeding us the cinematic equivalent of a bowl of beans reheated in the microwave, but also maybe please give us something to sink our teeth into? Well, here's a simplistic pitch for you, and one that can be leaned into as little or as much as you want. Simply put, it's collaborative, live-action Disney movies. I'm not asking for an Avengers-level movie with every Disney princess planted all together. No, stop that. Don't take the wrong idea again, studio. All I ask is for a second showing of a cast and world that's already been rebuilt, used again, and used together. Keep it small and simple. Which two characters are the most logically able to combine together for a sweet little duo story? It's like how we love the little Easter egg in Frozen that the cast of Tangled make a brief appearance. Logically sound, maybe just two princesses. Maybe Emma Watson's lost to time now that her movie's like 8 years old. But even something out of the latest stuff. Take Halle Bailey from the Little Mermaid remake and mix her with the cast of the Peter Pan live-action remake. Yeah, remember that one? You know, they're both caught up in the sea. And even though there's plenty of arguments to be made about the real timeline of when every Disney movie takes place, would you really care that much? Is that where we draw the line? Because if the audience reviews have anything to say, it is clear that nobody else cares. Heck, mix any two characters together with a good enough excuse. Live-action Jungle Book Mowgli arrives in Africa and meets Timon and Pumbaa. Even as just a short, it can come off as a quirky little piece of fan service, expanding and exploring the worlds that these remakes felt were necessary to dig back up in the first place. Add in all the little homages and nudges towards the DVD sequel without counting them as canon, or upgrade upon the source material to tell a new story with a new, nuanced message, and you've essentially reinvented the wheel again by just making a more evolved wheel. And with each little collab idea, there is so much potential to stories in so many different directions. Not to mention the marketing. Bringing together the most iconic Disney main character castings and putting them together to talk about a project? Choosing to expand a beloved story with original creativity in a way that doesn't delete the efforts of past work, but only acts to enrich it more sounds like a win-win on all sides. We loved the super collab 100-year anniversary short. Now give us a cheeky live-action one and see the numbers fly. These are the modern faces of one department of Disney, so coming up with the idea of repurposing and expanding their uses further seems like a no-brainer. You don't even need the full casts to do it. If there's no Will Smith genie, make a story that has just Jasmine and Aladdin. The characters should be rich enough from the source material to be able to handle their moments solo anyway. Can the same really be said for modern original Disney work? Whether it's a full theatrical experience, two main characters put their heads together to overcome a new challenge, be it a mutual goal they both have, a villain that has wronged the both of them, or a core theme from the movies that can be adapted and expanded in conjunction with each other. Whether it's a short of characters butting heads or pointing out parallels, highlighting a similar interest, or even really making educational child's content. I don't know, I could see it on Disney+. The Disney princesses teach you how to tie your shoelaces. Cuts to each character doing it their way, and then it just cuts to Aladdin asking the genie to magic swoosh it into reality. If not half the magical cast doing that anyway. Maybe that's a bit of a step too far. That's quite the price tag, bringing in these big names for a gig like that, and an even stranger approach on the marketing side of things. But the point is, what's the plan in 20 more years? Do we remake these movies again? But now in immersive VR? Or just another movie? Why are these animations being pasted over in flesh and then just as a one-time consumable? At a time where Disney's still on their microwave frenzy and demonstrably seeming creatively incompetent, it seems like a no-brainer to me that a comfortable middle ground is to explore the IP of Disney. Have the casted faces act as the new faces of this department of Disney. Bring them all back! Find uses for them, and use them and the source material they're mimicking as a stepping stone to tell new stories, new themes, and cashing in all the world building you're establishing as a brand on top of that. It's ironic for me to stand here and say, I hate the Disney live-action remake. Now, hey, I want some more Disney live-action remakes. But that's the thing. They're not remakes anymore. It's just fan service. It's taking these characters that we already love, giving them a look that's not as creative, sure, but then reinventing them in a way that could potentially satisfy one's inner child again. But I would love to see more Stitch doing something I can't predict, because it's a new story that I haven't seen before. With just a few references to his boiling temper or that one sandwich-making cousin of his. Add him causing a headache to any and all past IRL cast versions of other Disney characters and I'll have a whale of a time. Imagine just being a pest to only Aladdin for like an hour. Great. Or imagine a short of him causing mayhem to every Disney animal companion since the first live-action remakes. It acts as both a love letter, an original tale, a quick buck, and simple family entertainment, done much better than a re-microwave bowl of beans. The only real hurdle isn't even the budget of these big-name cast members. This is Disney. They can afford everything. They should. They are the monopoly. No, the real hurdle is having the ability to tell good stories, even with characters pre-built, which Disney clearly has difficulties with, somehow. And contracts. I don't even want to think about the contract details. Disney would have to me-angle some kind of deal to make this dream a reality. But given the current state that Disney is in, I don't think this compromise idea has any chance of coming to fruition, but boy is it a pitch I think about every now and again. Ah, the classic destiny of Disney parents. A wonderful little messed up cliche, and I wouldn't know the difference. I legitimately never met my father. He'd left my mum when I was -6 months old. Very impressive. Even still, I'd wager a larger than average amount of parents are unalived before their kids reach adulthood in animated movies compared to real life, and it's frankly a little silly. And so today we're going to be discussing this exact parental fate. How much actually changes in animated movies if you resurrect otherwise dead parents. From categorically turning a story into a very quick speedrun, adding all the more complications, or spreading into a whole new timeline reality that has so many unfurling consequences, let's see what happens when we unalive some classic animated parents. But first, let's talk about the trope itself a little bit more. It seems like every animated movie studio under the sun has dabbled with the dead parents cliche. I'm confident that the dead parent ratio in animated movies is a lot higher than in real life, and there's no better way to prove my point than looking at some examples from the Disney catalog, shall we? Cinderella's father? Dead. Cinderella's real mother? Dead. Snow White's real mum? Dead. Belle's mum? Also dead. Hero's parents from Big Hero 6? Dead. Oh, and his brother too. Anna and Elsa's parents? The writers decided to let them go. Bambi? Bang bang. Mufasa? Well, Simba can try, but he ain't waking up. Cusco? He was explicitly raised by Yzma. Quasimodo? Here comes Judge Frollo. Finding Nemo? Oh no, Marlin's a single dad. What happened to the mum? Yeesh. Tarzan? Tar cannot find his parents because they're dead. You get the idea, right? It is a strong and consistent kind of fate that if you are a parent to a protagonist character in a Disney movie, either you or your spouse. Maybe it's a 50-50 coin flip sometimes. And these are just with Disney movies. I mean, there's a reason that the Disney Wiki has an orphans category that's 340 entries long, which is crazy considering they've only actually produced, give or take, about 63 animated movies. That is a big ratio. In reality, some of these entries are from live-action franchises that they've bought, like Marvel and Star Wars, so, you know, that kind of will inflate the results. But the idea is still the same. It's clear that there is a higher average amount of parents left on the cutting room floor when it comes to fiction. And as absurd as this may all seem, it's a classic trope that has history since basically as far back as we've been telling stories, funnily enough. And in the present day, there are a number of different writing room related reasons why this cliche is used. Typically though, the use cases for this kind of trope fall into just two categories, depending on when exactly the death happens in the plot. The first scenario regards parents who die to kickstart the adventure, and are thus used as a device to get the protagonist moving along on their hero's journey. These parents are often oft at the very start of the movie, or sometimes even off-screen before it even begins. Usually, the absence of these positive authority figures is used as a means to push the protagonist into adventure, since there's nobody holding them back anymore. And sometimes, of course, this trope applies not just to biological parents, but to surrogate parents as well, or just generally a character that the protagonist looks up to. Now, sometimes the surprise survival of one of these parents is used as a plot twist later on in the movie or in the franchise, and to be honest, it's rare-ish enough that I don't have that strong an opinion on it. I don't think it's exactly lazy writing. How to Train Your Dragon did it. Am I gonna say that's lazy? I think I feel indifferent to the trope. It's just another trope, and really comes down to a case-by-case how well that kind of idea is presented. Are you a Frozen 2, or are you a How to Train Your Dragon 2? Perhaps if it became more common and popular, I would very quickly get sick of it, as a lot of people do with the general theme of parents dying in animated movies. It's a trope within a trope for sure, but when done well, it has led to some of the most famous and memorable movie moments ever.
I am your father.
When used poorly, however, it can very quickly cheapen the death of a character and really damage the narrative overall. On the other hand, sometimes parents are given breathing room to live well into the movie and then be killed. You know, for the plot. This second group of parental casualties die well after the adventure has already kicked off, so their death is used to increase dramatic tension. This tends to serve the death of a mentor function in the hero's journey. Sometimes in another subtrope, a parent is revealed to be evil or otherwise must be confronted, and sometimes they die there as a result. And these parents who die at the climax, I would say, are like a beefed up version of this killing the parents in the middle for dramatic tension kind of subtrope, especially if the protagonist is the one to face them or take their life. And I guess thinking about it, there is a secret third category too. That one being parents that aren't around because they literally do not exist. Yeah, try to wrap your brain around how that one works out first. This mostly comes to mind when it comes to Pixar films. Buzz Lightyear doesn't have parents telling him what to do because, You are a toy! And no, Star Command doesn't count, nor his assembly line, nor Andy. You can also argue it's because they're meant to sort of be adults, so it kind of doesn't count. Even Buzz Lightyear in Lightyear doesn't have parents because he's a man, you know? He doesn't rely on his father anymore. Kind of, well, that in that movie it gets a little specific, you know, but maybe it was a bad example. You get the idea. And then we won't be getting into that third category much today. It is certainly fascinating to think about too hard, especially when it comes to Pixar and stuff. Honestly, it kind of deserves its own video. Even covering a single different Pixar franchise like Cars is just so messy and entertaining to try and break down. Who are the parents to the cars? Who made them? Were they built in a factory? How about Francesco Bernoulli, who has his mama in the crowd during his big hometown racing Cars 2? How does the Cars age? Why does the world building of Cars make no sense? Are the Cars even alive? Do Cars give birth? Why are they Cars? Anyway, let's get back on topic. Dead parents.
The whole being dead thing!
Even amongst the living parents, many of them are straight up just written out of the movies they belong to. Take Tangled, for example. That had Rapunzel abducted as a baby in service of the plot, and her parents are so irrelevant, never really made much of a difference at all whether they survived like they did in the movie or were just quietly axed. Other than like a scene or two of them looking sad that doesn't really add much to the movie. They don't do much of anything other than start the whole lantern thing, which could have been started by the townsfolk on their own, you know? They're not that needed in the plot, sort of. That being said, I do really like the king's facial hair. I suppose I am sort of glad he lived. I'd rather not rob the world of such a impressive beard and stash. Getting rid of Mother Gothel, on the other hand, obviously would change the plot in a massive dramatic way, but she's not Rapunzel's real mother, and to that end, it doesn't matter for the sake of the biological parent death toll. Even still, having Mother Gothel die very early in the film would change things dramatically. After all, Rapunzel growing up alone in the woods and/or Flynn finding Rapunzel's corpse in the tower would be a very different movie indeed. But I guess that's a speedrun of the bad ending for Tangled. Let's see where else we can take things. I've noticed that parents being alive has been a more popular approach to the problem of what to do with parents in animated movies recently, with both the Mario movie and Encanto kind of being the examples that stick in my mind as showing our protagonist having a very large, very alive family, but still writing out the parents from the movie's actual adventure plot. Even though Mirabel's parents are a presence throughout the movie, Mirabel herself is solving her problems on her own. Still, I would say this movie's focus on generational trauma emphasizes the need for parents to be relevant in a story like this. Contrast that to the Mario movie. Mario just gets flushed down a drain. Luigi gets flushed down a drain. Mario's dad does not get flushed down a drain. Moana is another interesting example, as in the case of the titular main character's parents, they are alive and well. Yes, narratively they are an obstacle to overcome for the adventure to actually begin, but Moana's separation from them is still what bucks the status quo and allows the adventure to actually start. Sure, Moana's grandma Tala does die, but I'd argue that serves more to further the death of a mentor trope rather than just the dead parents one. Though, I guess since her dad is alive, it is still another dead biological parent for an alive character. Yeah, sure, right then, add it to the dead parent tally. But anyway, what if Moana's parents died too? Would it actually change much at all? Honestly, I'd probably say no. Not really, probably not. Maybe, let's say, taking from the first style of parent deaths, Moana's parents were just killed off screen before the movie began. She's probably still gonna be longing for adventure. Maybe Grandma Tala would raise her. Maybe her island would be in worse shape with more focus on the politics behind who would be a leader, a la Frozen. But altogether, nothing really changes about the plot. Moana is on an island. Moana wants to go to ocean. Island is getting sick. Moana leaves island. Moana meets shape changer demigod played by a pro wrestler turned actor Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
You're welcome.
Moana goes on many small adventures with The Rock, including one where Moana achieves her teenage dreams and meets a YouTuber.
That's my grandma's. I ate my grandma.
Realistically though, I can't imagine that much is really different here except one less force holding her back on her island. Even if her parents died in the middle of the movie, maybe by succumbing to the rot on the island or something, it really wouldn't change much since, you know, she's not there to see it. It could make the ending less happy, but altogether, it really wouldn't do much. That is, unless we got a cool Lin-Manuel Miranda succumbing to the rot song. I actually kind of really want that now. Damn. Either way, it's pretty easy to see why the parents lived in Moana. The movie works with or without them. Still, just because Moana works exactly as is with or without parents, doesn't necessarily mean that other animated movies will feel the same fate on the narrative front. In fact, some stories would be entirely minimized if the parents actually died. Speedrunning, like that one meme of the book being shorter if they made one small small change. Despicable Me is probably the funniest example I can think of there. The kids are already orphans, I know, so yeah, add that to the biological dead parents toll, I guess. And sure, Gru's biological family isn't really explored outside of his mum until later films, but like, come on. Imagine if Gru died in the middle of the movie. Anywhere. Maybe let's say Vector shot it down his ship during the dogfight, just a little bit too hard. The girls would be orphans again and would be back to square one. And the minions, they'd go find a new boss. Probably Vector or Elon Musk, give or take 10 years. That's it. Movie over. No moon stolen. The dance would probably continue, just more sadly and with less rehearsal time because they couldn't get out of their horrible orphan box. Vector's on top. The end. On the other hand, if we made a different change and the 3 girls he adopted actually had parents, Gru's whole cookie plot could have very well ended before it began, and Gru would have needed another way into Vector's mansion. The movie thus would have lost practically all of its emotional weight, and that's funny. A more complicated change to me is resurrecting Lilo and Nani's parents in Lilo and Stitch. Sure, on paper, it might work all the same. Lilo is sad and bullied and doesn't fit in and wants a dog. She goes to get a dog with her family. Whoa, the dog she got is super weird. But let's be honest with ourselves. Nani as a character is the only reason any sane family would get Stitch as a dog, despite how odd he is. Nani is an incredibly complex character who feels like she is failing to be a mother figure to her little sister after the death of her parents, whilst also trying to look after herself, and her complex connection with Lilo is the only reason she allows that freak dog into her home in the first place. Even though it is a clear point of contention in the film. Their broken family is the entire reason the plot is able to work. If her parents were around, there is no way that they'd take Stitch on as their dog, let alone keep him, right? Sure, I guess they'd in a sense be happier, and then, what, Stitch blows up the world? I'd agree to that, unless you buy into the whole Cobra Bubbles conspiracy theory, which I mean, Cobra Bubbles clearly isn't a normal social worker. He's a former CIA agent who has a prior connection with aliens at the end of the first film. The theory goes that Lilo and Nani's parents were also CIA agents that died in the line of duty, and Cobra Bubbles, alien connection and all, was watching over them as a CIA agent in lieu of a real social worker. Which, I mean, it makes sense. If we go with this, then maybe, just maybe, Lilo and Nani's parents would have let Lilo adopt Stitch if they lived. But even still, this is a stretch. How many CIA agents do you know that let their kids have alien dogs? Not many, I'd bet. One final movie I'd like to have a look at changing today is one of my favorites of all time, The Incredibles. Where I would, once again, like to bump off the parents. But this time, we're not doing it in the first movie. Instead, it'll be the second. Dynamic, I know, it's not canon, let's just roll with it. I was honestly disappointed by the second Incredibles movie. It was one of the very first animated movies I actually hyped on this channel. I did a random Incredibles 2 trailer back in 2018, a year and a half before I did movie content, just to show you how hyped I was for that movie. And the actual end result was a sequel that lacked so much of the depth and the nuance of the first film. Instead of being a subversive film analyzing a society from the perspective of super people like the first movie, the sequel to The Incredibles just kind of did standard superhero stuff, and especially with the design of some of the new characters, pulled away from the distinct aesthetic of the first movie. I mean, to me anyway, out of context, Evelyn visually looks more like Agent Calhoun from Wreck-It Ralph than she does anyone from the original movie's cast. Background characters included. It's just kind of a bland movie that, despite having some good moments, overall falls flat of what it's trying to do. I felt like the movie really didn't have a story that it wanted to tell, it just wanted to be more Incredibles because it's Pixar's superhero movie and people love superheroes right now. And it doesn't exactly give me high hopes for the third movie. But hey, the Disney corporate machine cannot be stopped. That being said, I think the most disappointing thing about the second Incredibles movie is how close it was to being really good. I feel like there could have been a few ways to rewrite the second movie and make it truly great. And one of the main ways of doing that is refocusing on the family drama and having the family forced to reconnect. It's one of the most satisfying, relatable parallels and themes of that first movie. They're just a relatable family doing family things while being supers. And the moments of family conflict within, for example, Bob being forced to parent while Elastigirl is away being a hero, are really funny and charming. And marketable, for that matter. I'm looking at you, Cookie Num Num sequence. These are the parts of the movie where it truly excels. In fact, the moments of family drama are where The Incredibles excels in general. The cave scene in the first movie following the plane crash is truly such a visceral, stake-setting scene. And I think if we were to rewrite this plot, one crazy version that Disney would absolutely never do would be a change that would really need to center in on these elements especially. And I see no more of a dynamic way of doing that, hypothetically, than by killing Elastigirl. Not off-screen, of course, not in the beginning of the movie. Have it be in the middle. Have it hurt. Helen has already gone away on her mission, living the career superhero life that Bob has only dreamed of, succeeding in all sorts of ways and getting all of these accolades and attention. Bob is jealous, and though he already has done some of the same things essentially in the prior movie, he is now seeing Helen's side of things through parenting the kids while she's away. It's hard. He's trying, but it's beating him up. Just like the movie had originally written, this is all identical to the movie as it stands at this point. But then, during her first encounter with Screenslaver, Helen is killed. How or why, you can find all sorts of ways to do it in a good fashion. It's not exactly the best look to have, hey, female character superhero goes out first and then dies alone. There's some tones you gotta work out. Maybe it's more of a thing of the management team screwing her over in some way, or just being, if you excuse the pun, stretched too thin on different antics. However you do it tastefully, of course, and then once you do, we really get into the meat of the matter. Bob only receives notice of this through a call from Helen's workplace. He's devastated. The kids watch him slump over and ask what's wrong, and all that he can get out is that it's your mom. I won't do an American accent. It's your mom. She's dead. Jack's sad despite not really knowing what's going on. Does he work as comic relief in that kind of tone of a movie scene? I don't know, but he's there, I guess. Screw it, we've gone this far, let's double down into it. We cut to Helen's funeral. The kids are really bonding with their father through their grief, and we get to see the personal side effects of vigilante work as it really pries open the why supers should be legal argument again. Bob is grief-stricken. Edna Mode approaches Bob at the funeral. She, despite being a comic relief character, has a genuine heart-to-heart scene with Bob, reminiscent of the heart-to-heart-ish scene that she had with Elastigirl in the first movie, but with, I guess, less comedy this time. She talks about Helen's trailblazing as a female superhero, and Bob talks about her as a person, a wife and a mother. And then it's here where he decides he's gonna finish what she started. And Edna makes him a new suit, you know, for marketability and all that. Maybe a new design, maybe harkening back to the old classic, back to the golden era, the nostalgic days, an old bluey type of suit. And as she leaves, a broken, determined Mr. Incredible stands there, weighted down now by the reins of mandatory parenting job, doubled down with the superhero vigilante work they're going to take up as well now. And then you reveal that the kids were listening in too, and they want to join. Bob refuses to lose them too, very much a mirror of this I work alone moment from the first movie. And then we see Bob as he gets a new suit montage. Meanwhile, the kids contact Frozone to help them babysit since they're left with Jack, and they're gonna seek out Screenslaver on their own. Frozone refuses to babysit but understands the stakes and takes Jack and the kids to Edna Mode, which would still give us the original Jack with Edna sequence of the original movie. We get new matching suits for all of them too, because, come on, it would be incredibly marketable that way. Seriously, how did Pixar miss up on this, actually? If Elastigirl gets a new suit, why doesn't literally everybody? I know it's like a cursed suit, but still. Marketing, man, what are you doing? But either way, the end of the movie comes together with Bob, Frozone, and the kids crossing paths, all trying to take down Screenslaver, and our remaining family members growing closer and honoring Helen's memories. We want this to be a classic Pixar tearjerker. The end of the movie is roughly the same as before, taking down Screenslaver and getting supers re-legalized, but this time with a speech from Violet to Evelyn about how taking the life of Helen means she's not any better than the bad guys who killed her dad. Some narrative cyclicism in there, and could be reflective of a speech that Violet couldn't say at the funeral because of nerves and shyness if we're resetting characters anyway. Maybe here's the chance she can tell a speech over her mum's dead body. That wasn't quite the tone I was going for, but you get the idea. A speech at a funeral, a eulogy. Either way, very dark, very crazy, but it would be a parental death shoved into another movie that would make massive changes for the ideologies, the themes, and the directions of the kids affected in said movie. Even a movie based on just the super kids, while both parents are dead and the whole adult generation's gone, in some future 30 years from now sequel, has so much it could run with that I know Disney are not going to do. Now, maybe if the film is way far too dark at this point for a Pixar movie, you then reveal that Helen is still alive here. And now you introduce the mind control goggles. We can introduce the other mind controlled supers here as well, and the end of the movie can play out as it is. Whether or not Helen is actually left dead at the end of the movie, the ending would be so much sweeter, with the family coming together and being sure to value each other even more because their family is the most precious thing. That's meant to be the core theme at the center of The Incredibles. And this just goes to show that character deaths can be used effectively to really drive home the point of a narrative or its messages. The original Incredibles killed off tons of superheroes that we didn't know, and that scene really transformed the stakes of the original movie. The sequel could have killed off one that we did, and that could have really pushed the movie's intended messages about the importance of familial love and of loss. I think this is the real reason why parental deaths are so prominent. It's a universal sign that things have changed, that the status quo has shifted. Love them or hate them, they're probably a trope that's here to stay. I think, however, writers being poignant about when and where to use them can help our movies be impactful, while also not feeling cheap. At the end of the day, the parent deaths that matter the most are the ones where the story could not function without them, and where they serve to improve the overall value of the narratives they are a part of. But what do I know about the impact of parents?
Never knew my father!
This, I think, is easily the weirdest of new movie trends. 2024, the year of the popcorn bucket. There are many different ways to try and sum up 2024, especially through a movie cinema lens, but this year, the cinema industry took the game up a notch when it came out to what we stored our movie time snackage in. The collectible bucket, usually shaped like a character's head, maybe nothing necessarily new, but we all know there was something else going on with them this year. From one unfortunate design becoming an internet phenomenon, every other movie would proceed to jump on making some of the craziest bucket designs out there. Gotta love some sweet and salted capitalism. And so, looking back at the year, we're gonna be viewing 2024 through these overpriced plastic containers. Starting with the granddaddy of them all, oh boy, it's the Dune Part 2 Sandworm Bucket. Yeah, don't play innocent with me, this is why you clicked on this video. It's because of this guy. Old Teethy McWorm over here. We can all see what it looks like and what alternative uses our dirty minds are thinking of. It's still hard to decipher the deliberate to accidental ratio on this one. It feels like something they didn't really think through, and yet I'd kind of concur that this legitimately was a huge publicity booster for the movie. Anything that gets carried into meme culture is an immediate winner. All press is good press, you know? And something like an internet meme has the platform to create things like Barbenheimer after all. This is why other movies' marketing departments were like, we need to up our game. Do something radical. Popcorn buckets have always been a way to make extra revenue, but this was the first time we'd seen it become an actual contributor to the movie's viral publicity. Here's the thing as well. If this thing was made for a comedy, it wouldn't have been as funny. It's the fact that it was a tie-in for what is, by all accounts, a seriously toned science fiction epic. That is what gives it that chaotic air of being unintentionally hilarious. Not only was the movie successful, but the sales of these damn buckets were off the charts. I hope they were only used for its main purpose. And they completely sold out, and the ones I found on eBay whilst researching this video are currently asking for $300 to over $1,000 for this thing. And so, the year of this bizarre popcorn bucket gold rush began. It's the classic life cycle of accidental success in our digital age. Brand does something unintentionally hilarious, internet makes it famous, other brands jump on the trend to rinse it for every dollar they can, meme dies. However, before anyone could deliberately jump on this trend, we first had another accidental member of this strange club, because to tie into the release of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, we were treated to a Slimer bucket with his mouth wide open, tongue sticking out and everything. And honestly, if we hadn't had the sandworm bucket just before this, I don't think our minds would have even gone there with this design. This is some well-known 80s iconography, and the design absolutely makes sense with that kind of character. You know, of course, Slimer would stuff himself with popcorn, and the gross-out element of having to pick it back out of him just fits perfectly for the kind of tone of some of those movies. However, post-Sandworm, the internet was on full alert to find the next inappropriate popcorn bucket, and mouth-open Slimer just fit the bill. Godzilla x Kong narrowly avoided a similar fate, theirs being Godzilla's head poking out of the water. However, fortunately, they took an alternative creative route, and naturally put the access point in the back of Godzilla's head. To be fair, compared to the rest of him at least, this guy has quite a small face, so I could see the popcorn logistics with that one. And it wasn't just the big action movies that wanted a piece of this action, with animated movies also upping their popcorn game. Kinda weird considering this whole trend was kicked off by a worm resembling a love aid, but that's nonetheless what they did. With Inside Out 2, as with all of these movies, there's different examples across cinema chains. However, the most notable efforts included a bucket design like the core memory orbs from the movie, or for all intents and purposes, a ball with the Inside Out 2 logo on it. However, if I was a collector, what I'd be gunning for would be the one of Anger's flaming head. I gotta be honest, I think this is the one thing I think Despicable Me 4 did better than Inside Out 2, which is a wild sentence to say. With their bucket, they made a full-on baby Gru carrier. Complete with the iconic Gru scarf, as well as a couple minion symbols, this thing's most notable feature is the fact that it has wearable straps. You can wear the damn popcorn bucket. How very Disneyland. Because if you're gonna eat a baby carrier's worth of popcorn, you may as well have it strapped to you too. In fairness, logistics-wise, I guess it means you won't have that moment where the lights come on and your shirt is littered with crumbs. But at the same time, you're kind of just trading one source of shame for another. Like, cool, you got rid of the crumbs, but now you're using a baby carrier as a bib. Evidently, I'm not the guy who's gonna wear it, but you can certainly appreciate the creativity that went into it. Considering the less than family-friendly origins of this craze, you gotta appreciate that they just used the opportunity to be more inventive with a bucket design that ties directly into the plot of the movie. However, if you're Deadpool and Wolverine, you go the complete opposite direction. They fully jumped in on the meme with this filth-ridden monstrosity of a promotion. I can't unsee the clip of the butter dripping. And for what they were going for, they absolutely hit the right tone. The wide open mouth, the tongue, it's unsettling to look at. When it comes to Deadpool's marketing, there's a precedent for this kind of thing. We all know that Ryan Reynolds has his head screwed on for a viral marketing campaign. And yet, a criticism of the Deadpool and Wolverine campaign was that the excessive budget they were privy to actually took away from some of the more guerrilla marketing of the first couple movies. The underdog charm of those movies wasn't quite there. However, by most accounts, I'd say that this popcorn bucket promo was an exception that totally hit that tone exactly right. The best Deadpool marketing is when it feels like the character's overseeing the promo himself, and that's very much what we get here. He's literally signed the bucket, and of course, at Wolverine's expense. Also, since we do have this shot of the butter, for those always asking if it's true that we generally don't butter our popcorn in the UK, the answer is yes, it's only sugar and salt. You're really gonna add butter to what are already little capsules of salt and sugar? That's crazy. But don't worry, we keep our life expectancy low through alcohol intake instead. Anyway, a movie I heard most people needed a drink to get through was Venom: The Last Dance. Like Deadpool and Wolverine, they also went with a mouth open with tongue look, but like Sony to Marvel in general, utilizing it less successfully. On its own, it's a decent enough bucket design that matches up well to the Venom character, whilst also continuing the dirty-mindedness of the viral aesthetic. They just didn't seem to make anything of it. Considering the version of Venom they've established, for better or worse, I felt like it was fully on brand for them to also have made a thing of the rude popcorn bucket. I mean, you made the clip of the guy drowning in milk on Hot Ones like this. It's a decent addition, but it doesn't exactly reinvent the wheel, which is still higher praise than the movie generally got. Onto the alien Romulus bucket, and whoa. Okay, they can't play innocent with this one. I don't care that they just based it on the xenomorph head. Look at the shape of it! Sure, they at least haven't made the mouth the entry point. Cool. Beyond that, they knew exactly what they were doing. And again, it's hit that Dune 2 mark of being associated with a more serious movie, so well done them, I suppose. Also, just a quick reminder that both Deadpool and Wolverine and Alien Romulus are Disney-produced movies. If the fact that they produced these movies wasn't wild enough, then these buckets sure hammer that home. Beetlejuice 2 took a different approach to responding to the Dune 2 bucket. Rather than joining the not safe for work bucket trend, they instead used the franchise's own version of their sandworm. And honestly, I think that was a way more creative approach than just yet another smutty looking bucket. At this point, with every movie trying to make the rudest looking thing possible, the Beetlejuice sandworm just looks like a classy choice at this point. Not every day that you could describe a cheaply made popcorn bucket as classy, but there it is. Beyond that, the design of the bucket being made up of the worm wrapped around itself is probably the best realized concept of all of them so far. This may well be the best bucket of the year as far as I'm concerned. Are we going to make this an award ceremony every year? Only challenged by perhaps, rather fittingly, Gladiator 2. That sandworm's cute and all. Try a model of the Roman Colosseum to put your popcorn in. I can't tell whether this was a great idea for a bucket or just completely overboard. Is this the bucket that jumped the shark and pulled away the consumerist curtain? Because not only is this thing a full-on toy coliseum pretending to be a popcorn container, but once you've finished gorging on an arena's portion of salt, there's a QR code at the bottom that you can scan and watch tiny gladiators fighting in the bucket through your phone. It's definitely going completely overboard, but I can't deny how creative that is. If you're going to overcharge everyone at the retail stand, at least give them some effort. And amongst many other things, that is some effort. But we're not done yet. Let's look at the more recent examples to close out 2024. As we know, another movie that came out at the same time as Gladiator 2 was Wicked. Glicked never happened, but even still, I kinda love that despite both of them being successful on that opening weekend, almost universally, no one bought into Glicked as a thing. You may have also been as successful as the Barbenheimer weekend, but that doesn't mean you're getting Barbenheimer status. Anyway, Wicked has been a truly merch-hungry monster this past month. Its cross-promotion invasion is beyond any campaign we've seen in a while. Perhaps since Star Wars The Force Awakens in 2015. And to match that energy with their popcorn buckets, they made some tins. Tins with lids. Obviously, nowhere near the craziness of some of the other examples, but also, I don't hate it. A tin seems suitably classy for the movie it's attached to, the artwork's nice enough, and having an Elphaba and Glinda one gives them some collectability too. Not to mention, the problem you always get with a lard popcorn is getting half of it home when you inevitably don't manage to eat it all, so the lids are kind of a welcome addition too. I want to see more lids for these buckets. But yeah, despite its simplicity, I'd actually say this is a better example of a collectible that could last long term as something that isn't just a cheap bit of plastic that you bought from the cinema. A lot of these are kind of redundant beyond being an elaborate popcorn bucket. But this one, you could rinse out afterwards and repurpose it in some way. And not in the way the Dune 2 one could be. I think that's the worst thing about the meme. You know some people have probably tried it. I'm starting to feel bad for those damn worms. On to the bucket from another huge movie in Moana 2, and it just kind of seems impractical from where I'm standing. It's a wave. And initially, I was unsure where it even opened. From the photos, it looked like it opened up in the middle, which seemed to avoid a whole chunk of vital popcorn space. However, then I found another photo after searching for it, and it is at least a bit at the top. Again, no shady connotations with this one, family friendly and all that. I guess it's quite creative, but just not the shape what I would have reached for when it came to designing a popcorn bucket. It's not even the star of the show here. That goes to the Moana 2 nacho boat. Look at this thing. They're seriously trying to pass this off as a plate. My guy, that is not a plate! That is pouring cheese dip into a playset. It's just the absolute audacity of this as a product. And sure, the movie made quite a lot of money, so go for it. But I just want to know who in the trust fund family came home from the movies with a frickin' nacho boat. On to what's described itself as the Popcorn 3 popcorn vessel. It's just Sonic's head. It's his head. You can open up the top of his skull and fill it with popcorn. Cool. Kind of more in line with what we'd expect from a popcorn bucket. Definitely doesn't match the freaking excessiveness of some of the designs this year. Yeah, not much to say on the bucket. It's also why I glazed over Transformers 1, as they did the same thing, but with Optimus and Bumblebee. Whilst Wild Robot just went with a classic movie print on a normal bucket. Yeah, remember those? Maybe it's a sign that the dust has started to settle on this trend. I don't know. Only kidding, the Mufasa popcorn bucket is bringing us a full-on model of Pride Rock. You open up the top rock and whoa, look, it's full of popcorn. My take would have been the popcorn being on the ground below Mufasa, as if they're all worshipping him, but that's why I'm not in charge of creating these things. But taking my complete lack of enthusiasm for the movie out of it, it does match the heights of some of the other designs from this year. I just find it funny. Imagine people watching this movie whilst eating out a scale model of an African landscape on their lap. What a year this has been. I think capping off the year's buckets with this design just seems fitting with how excessive and ridiculous they got. From memes about a sandworm taking rock to a hollow plastic version of Pride Rock. When we look back at 2024, we can now sit back and think, probably the more pressing stuff that happened in our lives, but maybe on occasion about the horny buckets we met along the way as well. There you are, everybody, your year summarized in popcorn buckets. You're welcome. For a studio that has created some of the most beloved and innovative 3D animated movies of all time, Pixar has, in some ways, always played it kind of safe. It's been said, for example, that almost all of the studio's best movies can basically be summed up as what if blank had feelings, and then, filling in the blank with whatever inanimate object the movie will end up being focused on. There's a reason so many Pixar classics were made up at one dining table once. What if toys had feelings? What if bugs had feelings? What if fish had feelings? What if robots had feelings?
Wow.
What if my sleep paralysis
demon had feelings?
Monsters Inc., of course. Hell, even Inside Out is basically what if feelings had feelings. You've heard of this before, right? Sure, this can be a little bit reductive, and sure, it doesn't apply to every Pixar film. I don't think what if old people had feelings is a particularly great description of Up, for example. But at the end of the day, there's a reason this formula exists. Pixar uses it as a pretty easy framework for which to build many of their most successful, millions-selling, multimedia franchise-spawning stories. These little descriptions, though they may be simple, are a fairly great way to establish a unique fantasy world for the films without changing much. I mean, usually, they're just an exact copy of our real world with this one little line serving as the core change, Every other little change to the world stems from this one bit. With Toy Story, for example, the core assumption is what if toys had feelings. Other than that, everything else about the world is the same. Toys serve the same function in this world as they do in ours, and they're played with by humans. However, they're alive and sentient when we're not there, so that way they can express their feelings and discover what it's like to be a toy. Finding Nemo, on the other hand, explores an undersea world from the perspective of a sentient fish. Human activity is identical in this setting to our own. We extract from the ocean without a care in the world, but the fish are sentient, and that's about all the change we get from our real world. Even a film like WALL-E works on the idea that robots will eventually become sentient and have feelings. To get there, the writers have to advance robotics a lot, and the changes that are made to our own world are done in this specific sci-fi frame, but robots have become so advanced and the world has become so capitalistically dystopian that everyone has to go to space. This is a much more sweeping departure from our own world compared to Bug's Life or Inside Out or Toy Story in some ways, but it still feels believable, This is a world that our world could turn into. And the emotional arcs and characters of the stories are also fairly easy to derive from the premise as well. Take Inside Out. What if feelings had feelings? Well, we're gonna need to have some feelings as our characters then. What are they gonna do? Well, make a person feel. But they are, as embodiments of these feelings, only a part of a whole person. Maybe these emotions would clash with each other too, and then bam! We have some characters in a conflict. Though obviously there are other world-building decisions to make from this core decision, and they are very important too. This one line still is the center of a Pixar classic story. In fact, I think sticking closer to just changing things that allow for the core what if had feelings world-building assumption to work and leaving everything else from our real world in place is a good thing. A movie like Luca, which operates roughly on what if sea monsters had feelings, is pretty close to our real world in many ways, but what changes it does make from our real world directly serve this core assumption, allowing for our human and sea monster characters to interact. Other than that, it's basically the real world, Vespers and all. On the other hand, a movie like Cars, which operates on the what if cars had feels premise, pretty tightly fails to provide a good explanation to where humans are. Instead of leaving them in the world and building the film around it, they're not just removed, but replaced by the cars themselves. I feel like I get caught up asking a bunch of questions about this every time I talk about cars, but where did these cars come from? Are they born? Are they made from a factory? Were there humans once and then blink they're all cars? Why do they have mothers and families then? And what about makes and models? Why are the cars branded? All of these things that could have easily been explained by keeping humans intact, but by removing them entirely, by making changes to our world that branches heavily from simply executing the core world-building choice, it at least poses a lot of questions. Whilst this doesn't break the films by any means, it creates a lot of unexplained questions, and very much made Cars a bit of a black sheep of the Pixar classics, if you ask me. Then again, I suppose a Cars movie with humans that ride in them would be really interesting and maybe a little freaky. Maybe the universe is better without them after all. Of course, this is all still a good bit reductive, right? I know Pixar does a lot to make their world seem believable, and of course, there are other changes made in the world as well. For example, the Woody's Roundup and Buzz Lightyear brands were fictional until created for their film universe. WALL-E isn't a real kind of robot, even if it just runs on Apple OS. And of course, we don't have a control center in our brains operated by little people designed to help us feel our emotions. But even still, these story choices are made with the intent of furthering the core idea. With all that said, Pixar has seemed to step away from these fairly simple one-line pitches recently. Yes, there have always been outliers since the beginning of their theatrical run. The Incredibles, for example, probably shouldn't be described as what if superheroes had feelings. That's not the core world-building assumption here. I'd wager that assumption is more or less what if superheroes lived normal lives, which is close, but not quite the same thing. Of their 28 feature films currently released, only 11 have broken this tradition. I chose not to count Soul, Coco, or The Good Dinosaur in this counter this time around. What if Souls had feelings is a little bit of a stretch, you know? But I don't think it characterizes the movie very well. Same with Coco. What if the dead had feelings? Feels like it almost works for that movie too, but not quite. And The Good Dinosaur, I mean, it just swaps who the sentient people are. It's not a fundamental change to the universe, really. Still, if you decide to count these 3 outliers, then that only means 8 out of their 28 films do not qualify. On top of that, a vast majority of their most popular franchises, particularly the ones with a lot of sequels, follow this formula to the letter. The only Pixar films with theatrically released sequels that don't fit into this formula are The Incredibles 2, and if you're really stretching it, Lightyear. Yes, I know this reductive version of the Pixar pitch isn't a terribly original idea, but I think this really is the secret sauce of Pixar. And to prove it, I want to take a look at a time when Pixar really went against their pitch, choosing not to use it for their own world building and instead taking a more Disney-typical approach. The movie I'm talking about, of course, is Brave. Brave is a lot of things, but it's not a traditional Pixar film, that's for sure. First and foremost, it's a perfect example of a Pixar film that isn't using the what if blank had feelings formula for its world building. Not even at its most stretched form. The core idea of the movie's world building can't be what if bears had feelings, or worse, what if women had feelings. Because, well, it's not like every bear in Brave is a human either. It's just that certain humans are turned into bears. To that end, most bears are probably normal bears and not sentient, I would assume. Second, Brave is structured like a traditional Disney princess movie. Merida is even included in the Disney princess lineup. She might be from a film made by Pixar, but her film is basically a Disney princess movie. And stepping away from this traditional Pixar movie format probably didn't work to its favor. There are a lot of things wrong with this movie, and it's one of the least popular Pixar movies for a reason. When I went ahead and covered this movie on the channel, I had to give it a terrible instead of an amazing, and frankly, that just makes me sad. Also, that video flopped. There is really no demand for it. Brave just doesn't feel like a Pixar film, and I can't help but assume that the step away from this formula is why. And it's really funny because in 2012, the very same year that Brave released, Disney released a movie that is widely beloved and very much feels, in many respects, like a great Pixar film. That movie is What If Video Game Characters Had Feelings. It is Disney's Wreck-It Ralph, a film that follows the story of a video game villain on a soul-searching quest. And what do you know, the core storytelling assumption of this world just fits so well into the Pixar formula. This movie functions way more like a classic Pixar than films like Onward or Brave. And this is probably why. And it's not like Disney has sole ownership of this idea anyway. Disney classics have used this idea before, for example with movies like The Jungle Book or The Fox and the Hound, and Illumination, loath as I might admit it, has this idea at the heart of their world building for The Secret Life of Pets. And even most recently, with the Sneaks trailer, it's what if shoes had feelings to a certain extent. But I suppose anthropomorphizing animals is just the simplest version of this idea. Still, there's a spark that exists in a movie like Nemo that doesn't exist in these other worlds from other companies. And to understand why, I'd like to take a look at Wreck-It Ralph versus its sequel. Ralph Breaks the Internet is generally considered a terrible movie, but it also doesn't feel anything like its predecessor, and it especially does not feel like a Pixar film. And that's because it's not really concerned with that initial premise of what if video game characters had feelings anymore. Instead, it's more of a, haha look, it's the internet movie, you know? And no, the premise is not, what if the internet had feelings? That actually would make for a great prompt. Maybe a cool Tron-inspired Pixar film. Actually, I think I'd love that. Ralph Breaks the Internet feels, honestly, more like the Emoji Movie in its world building than a Pixar movie. And again, the first movie wasn't a Pixar film, but it sure did feel like one. Speaking of the Emoji Movie, on paper, the Emoji Movie should follow this trope really well, you know? What if emojis had feelings? But that movie sucks, so what gives? Whilst the core assumption presumably fits well into our formula, nobody is going to tell you that the Emoji Movie of all films fits into that classic Pixar formula. So is our model the thing that's flawed? These two bad examples feel off compared to Pixar films for a reason. Though this same sort of prompt is used to generate their premise, it's not used to engage seriously in world building and characterization. These stories could have been approached with any interchangeable digital characters. They aren't really exclusive to being told with emojis or video game characters. There's nothing truly unique that these kind of characters lend to these stories. Compare that to the original Wreck-It Ralph, and that story only can work because of these specific characters derived from this specific world-building choice. And indulging in world-building is really where Pixar films are at their strongest. While it can be argued that a movie like Pixar's Cars goes too far, especially when it comes to its sequel Cars 2, which frankly goes off the rails within the universe and doesn't adhere to the original prompt much at all, you can't deny that the world building is part of the fun. Cars as a universe is built on the puns and the clever integration of Cars stuff into the universe. Though the initial implementation is in some ways flawed, it's way closer to using the prompt as a creative world building point compared to these other films. These films either do a bad job exploring their world building options, are inconsistent, or choose not to think about it much at all outside of the premise. Compare that to something like Finding Nemo or WALL-E. That's a story you really could only tell with fish in that specific setting with those specific types of characters. They are reliant on world building to set up their narrative, and their narrative feeds to their world building. Elemental, on the other hand, is on paper a pretty stock story in some ways that can be told with plenty of different characters, but it's layered thanks to its world building. The characters are elements and their world is made for elements. As a result, what could be a bland love story is transformed by indulging in that core presence. Though then again, Elemental does exactly what I criticized Cars for earlier, removing people and departing from our everyday world. I think when it comes down to it, this works because elements don't need people to exist. Cars do need people. It's part of their very function, just like how Toy Story wouldn't work without humans to play with them. At the end of the day, this type of premise clearly is the backbone of Pixar's catalog. That said, it's not a guarantee that the movie made from it will be great, or even good. A lot still lies in the actual execution. As dumb as this sounds, given the movie's reputation, there is a world where, based on the same premise, the Emoji Movie is really good because it chooses to really take time to flesh out the world. It uses the concept of being an emoji with feelings to really tell a compelling story that, despite the abstractness of the character, touches on the human experience. That's not what happens in our version of the world, but there is a world where that works with the Emoji Movie. And that last point I made there is, of course, the missing piece of the Pixar puzzle. It's not just about the premise, it's not just about the world building, that I've said that word way too many times this video, and it's not about the character types either. All of these elements are absolutely essential to a good Pixar film, but at the end of the day, the very best Pixar films tap into human emotion. They want to be impactful on their human audience. They want to use the specifics of their abstract settings and characters to make their audiences feel. And with that all combined with the green flags we mentioned earlier, that is Pixar's true secret sauce. Using unique worlds and characters to take the viewers to an exciting, interesting place, but also to have the viewer leave feeling transformed and like they better understand their own real human experiences. Good Pixar films are, at their core, heartfelt. It's what they, at their best, do better than every other studio. It's why they have the reputation they have. When we think of the best Pixar moments, it's those touching times where we see characters part ways or reunite or talk through the tough times in ways necessitated by the film's world building. You might start off in a story where there's a whole new dimension of monsters having a civilization, but then you end up talking about the rejections of not being good enough in your field despite dedication. It might be about letting go of certain people as they reach new human milestones like heading off to university. Or it might be the all too relatable emotional crashing out that comes with a tumultuous time in your natural developing life, like Riley in Inside Out 2. It goes far more beyond the core concept of Pixar's pitch being what if blank had feelings, it's what if blank had human feelings that our human audiences can resonate with too. That is what makes some of the good non-Pixar projects great and great Pixar projects masterpieces. That, at least to me, is a good way to express Pixar's secret sauce. And as more recent Pixar films are trying to come away from the one-line pitch that works for the old school stuff, sometimes it's been a little more hit or miss, as they try to breach beyond even their own immaculate boundaries. It is no secret that the Disney live-action remake genre is a slowly deteriorating breed. As each new Disney remake installment comes out, they just seem to get worse and worse over time, with this year being the new record lows of Snow White and Lilo and Stitch, even though they've made all sorts of box office successes anyway. At the time of recording this, Lilo and Stitch is around $775 million. It might very well breach $1 billion, and because of that alone, the corporation will probably keep spitting them out, but God, is it not more than enough time to stop. And it's been time to stop ever since we had Tim Burton's bleak version of Alice in Wonderland in 2010. But then with that movie making over $1 billion because it was a 3D movie coming out just after Avatar, and ever since, Disney have just not let this trend die, no matter how much it seems to be actively denting their reputation. Disney's live-action remakes have been a significant part of the studio's strategy to reimagine its animated classics, to the extent that that is exactly how they brand them: reimaginings. And what delightful efforts we have seen, from good to predominantly mediocre to outright bad. And of course, there's nothing anywhere close to great. And even with the good ones by Disney, they always come with the asterisks of, well, obviously, it'll never touch the original. But, la 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 la. But either way, especially with the likes of DreamWorks now dipping their toes in a much more restricted, faithful way that, at least on my end, is getting a little bit more positively received, because it's not breaking the initial movie and pasting over an animator's work and a writer's masterpiece. Let's go through each of the live-action Disney remakes over the times and see just how far we've fallen from the start. Not that it's necessarily a perfect start, as we begin with Alice in Wonderland from 2010, the movie that supposedly kicked this all off, except it didn't. I was not a fan of this movie personally, but I know it has some fans, and a big part of that may well be because, shock horror, it is not a copy and paste remake. Weirdly enough, it actually acts as a sequel to the original story, and with a lot of stylistic choice behind it, with an actual creative involved in the form of Tim Burton. And with how much money it made as well, it does leave you wondering what could have been if the other remakes followed a similar suit of more radically springing off of their original stories, giving us something more unique, as well as stylistically making it impactful and artsy, as opposed to so flat and corporate that later Disney live-action musicals end up becoming. This was at least an attempt to take things in a different direction, though ironically it just led to a timeline of repasting the same stories again and again and again. But before you think Tim Burton was out here making original choices with his remakes, just wait until we get to Dumbo later. Still, next is Maleficent from 2011, the poster child for let's look at the story again, but realize the villain wasn't so bad after all. And this movie just feels like this was Angelina Jolie going, I want to play that character, and then Disney going, sure. This just isn't good. And it's a shame, because this is another one where they did try and make something different. They were still trying to work out what they were going for before they realized easy was the easiest profitable option. We're still in the days here where Disney are yet to realize we can literally just copy and paste the original movie and don't need to go to these lengths of twisting up the story to make money. Even here, where they're being lazy, they were still terrible. Then you've got Cinderella from 2015. With half a decade later from the start, for a lot of people, this is the good one. Kind of where I would imagine the real live actions begin. The definitive article, the well-reviewed hit that basically encouraged Disney to double down. I think it's fine, but ultimately resent it for the path that it took us down. It does a decent job of updating the story and making interesting creative decisions in fleshing it out. You know, it's got Kenneth Branagh directing it now, which I'm sure helped as well, making it look competent. Again, I'd say it's good. Not great, but very much the classic, simple, whelming kind of Disney live-action remake. Then you come to The Jungle Book in 2016, arguably maybe one of the better ones, possibly one of the best. We had 2 solid efforts in a row, with Christopher Walken as a giant, creepy version of King Louis, never forgetting that. However, another shake of the head for me, because this would end up being the precursor to the Lion King remake. They even pulled Jon Favreau straight from this movie into Lion King, and then to Star Wars. And he's in Marvel. The mouse has a grip on that boy. Speaking of boys, the thing that really makes this stand out against Lion King is that you have the live-action Mowgli as a reference point to appreciate the genuinely amazing visual effects. And he really sells the movie, despite the fact that he's basically running around an empty green screen room in his underpants. Moving forwards, we have Alice Through the Looking Glass from 2016 as well, the forgettable sequel to the first one, with Borat as a clock villain. This one just flopped, despite hopes that it could get away with being bad and make $1 billion, because that was what the first movie did. But no, it failed. And perhaps with it died the concept, at least early doors, of making more sequel original content based off of these live-action remakes, since apparently they can only be one and dones, keep it safe and simple. But either way, it's also not a great movie. Beauty and the Beast 2017 is another pretty classic, simplistic in its design, but never quite gonna hold up to the original. The third time it felt like they tried, just didn't work so well this time around. With the exception of Luke Evans as Gaston and Josh Gad by his side, the rest of this was a proper snooze fest for me personally. I think this was the first disappointment as well, as everyone had Cinderella and Jungle Book as the standard up to this point, and this wasn't either of those, and I don't think remakes in general will be from here. It was just fine. It was the point where fine became the aim at this point for Disney. Come round to The Lion King 2019, and here's an experiment that was interesting for the first 5 minutes. That opening sequence is truly a staggering feat of animation, which, by the way, is what it is. Animation. People still can't help themselves calling this a live-action remake. Other than the sunrise in the opening shot, everything you're looking at is a pixel, which is why it was incredible to watch, until you saw what it meant for the character animation, leaving the situation rolling around the uncanny valley and only looking slightly better than those talking animal movies where they edit the talking mouths onto them. Getting these emotional and charismatic voice performances slapped onto faces that do not reflect that at all. And beyond that, I think this was the point where people cottoned on to, oh, this is literally the same movie. Some differences are in there, like making Scar less interesting as a villain, but this is when the shot for shot was becoming more apparent. And then, I'm remembering this era now, then comes Aladdin 2019. The one that looked destined to be terrible, but was actually okay. Again, I can't give this one the merits of greatness or anything close to that, particularly with Jafar perhaps being the worst translation of a villain in the bunch. I'm not familiar with the actor, but boy was that more wooden than Pinocchio, and that's saying something with his remake on the way. But I thought the big blue will in the house was going to be a lot more off-putting than it actually turned out to be. Maybe that's changed post-2022, mind you. But before that defining event, he was actually pretty entertaining, despite how cursed his blue CGI form looked. He actually made it his own instead of trying to compete with Robin Williams, which was definitely the smart play there. You had some great other talent in there, Naomi Scott as Jasmine with that new song that wasn't actually that bad, and there were some clear differences from the original story that made it more interesting. But yeah, Jafar sucked. And then there's Dumbo 2019. Hi again, Tim. Yeah, remember how I said last time he at least used some of his signature imagination and style to do something different with Alice in Wonderland? Yeah, that's not what we're in the business of here. You wouldn't know Tim Burton made this movie. I think that's the biggest loss here. This is very much the point where the directors are just sort of treating this as only a job for the big mouse house. It's the same story, some insignificant changes, just without any of the colourful expression of the original, nor even the gothic flair of the director. You seeing a pattern brewing? The only W I really can give is it not including the crows from the original. That's it. Well done, you weren't racist. This also marked the beginning of we're gonna do this on Disney Plus as well, being amongst the streaming service's debut originals. To be fair, I'd say its hollowness is an accurate reflection of a lot of Disney Plus original content, so well done guys, very thematic. And for Mulan in 2020, this one really went full on, let's make it gritty and suck the joy out of it. They wanted to make Mulan a serious epic, when what people loved about the original movie were the songs, Eddie Murphy as the dragon, and the distinct characters. Yet that is all gone in this version. Perhaps in an effort to be culturally accurate, but if this is the result, maybe just leave it alone. For one, despite all that effort to be accurate and respectful, ultimately China declined to have it released over there anyway. This is one of the prime examples of just meddling a story and making a mess instead. Now Cruella of 2021 is a little bit of a different take for this one. Seems as they already remade the actual movies in the 90s with Glenn Close. And again, it's fine. Maybe even good. Largely in part to Emma Stone putting in a performance that could gun for an Oscar. And yet, you leave the movie not quite sure what they actually want to do with this character. It's better than Maleficent, but you still leave with that same feeling. So is she gonna be a baddie or not? Or is it gonna be another, here's why she's not so bad after all kind of trope? The woman who took joy in skinning puppies to make a coat. Not such a bad egg in the end, apparently. It's confusing. And then for the real doom and gloom era, Pinocchio 2022 is potentially the worst of the bunch. Man, and they had Mr. Back to the Future doing this, Robert Zemeckis, with his golden gump Tom Hanks as Geppetto. And yet, you have the hollowest retelling you possibly could out of this movie. We had 3 versions of Pinocchio come out in 2022, and at least the cheap stinker of the bunch had the decency to have entertainment mixed in. This one, it just goes to hit the right story beats and do absolutely nothing with them. And Pinocchio himself looks so much like the classic one that you have to wonder what the point of this version even was. Not that the effects are good, they're not. And Jiminy probably ended up making children cry, so I'm starting to feel like these Disney Plus ones deserve their own category because they are something else. If a live action remake's going to Disney Plus, run is basically the motto here. And with so many of the elements of the original animated movie put into this movie and used later on in the likes of Snow White, it really does just feel like such a hollow format of just deleting animation for the superior format of cinema created by the very studio that platformed and built itself out of animation in the first place. But anyway, before we get to the conclusion, we have Peter Pan and Wendy from 2023. Remember this one? Once again, the same motto of run is very much the same for this one. And even as someone who's meant to be reviewing movies, it's mostly animation I do, so it explains it. I didn't watch this one. It looked terrible, and I didn't bother. And maybe that's a message that most of the audience had, because if you want us to trust a remake, maybe don't dump it on streaming. Thankfully, from here, it's all theatrical, as 2023 also brought us The Little Mermaid. And again, at this point, it's very much found its formula. This was fine. I guess it's one of the better remakes. Halle Bailey is great as Ariel and really nails the songs where she needs to. It's good. It's fine. I didn't even mind Melissa McCarthy as Ursula, even though they totally could have gotten like a drag queen involved or something. But beyond other performances being kind of flat, Javier Bardem is uncharacteristically boring as Trident, and Awkwafina as Scuttle is probably the one clunker in her bizarre amount of recent voice roles. This also got to the point where you're just kind of watching the movie and you can enjoy it in a bubble, but it just doesn't have the same magic in some form. Very sanded down and whelming. And as we get to 2024, if you like, you could define it as having no direct remakes of Disney animation classics. Instead, we had Mufasa, a prequel to a shot-for-shot remake. An interesting poke, I guess. Mufasa the Lion King had them trying to at least make the character designs more dynamic and expressive. It's nice to see there is slight learnings over a 15-year period of making these slightly more quality, but whilst it wasn't quite enough, I do have to acknowledge that at least some effort was made here to do something interesting. It still relies on nostalgia, but tries to do something new. That being said, it is just filled to the brim with disjointed narrative and weak emotional beats where they're really meant to hit. any original songs flop in comparison to the original, and it seems so evidently clear that modern Disney writers just can't keep up to the standard of the older Disney classics. It still feels just derivative of the original Lion King and its themes, done poorly in the modern age because creating narratives are hard and Disney seems to be consistently failing. And all of these song numbers are unfortunately very much not Lin-Manuel Miranda's best work. And as we finally catch up to Snow White, what a treat of a disaster this one was. Trying to avoid controversy on multiple fronts, but ultimately walking straight into it in all possible places. If any Disney movie should have been left alone from a remake, it was this one. It's the original Disney movie. It's loaded with old-fashioned ideals that are fine in the context of the 1937 original, but are just weird when you try to either tiptoe around them, carry on with them, or just outright remove them. Case in point, the 7 creatures and the 7 bandits. They didn't know what to do here, so their solution was, let's go weird places with the story. That's it, just pad out the runtime, guys. And despite all of the controversy, the one thing that everyone agreed on was Gal Gadot didn't work as the queen. Weirdly, she almost did as the old woman with the apple, though. Truly an abysmal cinema experience, which is impressive considering this is what they'd made after 15 years of experience. A slow, deteriorating element of artistic non-existence, tone-deaf controversy handling, just for actually having the audacity to meddling with it anyway, and then just making such a confused product by the end of the day. And finally, wrapping up 2025, here we are back to Lilo and Stitch. It's here that my last glimmer of hope in this regime of unoriginality and commerce fully, properly died with the Disney remakes. I may well not even bother with the Moana remake that they're also making, and a Hercules one that's inspired by TikTok, even if the marketing looks good. It's clear that when it comes to these Disney live-action remakes, they just don't hold on to the artistic core that made their originals great. They don't have the writers to keep up with the writers of the past, and either it is a straight copy and paste that ends up inferior to the original stories, or they make new original decisions that go so far off that it ruins the reputation of the source material it's based off of. There's no win-win situation, but it just keeps running again and again. I do wonder if there will genuinely be a point when Disney stops these remakes, because the fact of the matter is they still make too much profit, but now that there's the likes of rivaling live-action remakes in the form of DreamWorks and How to Train Your Dragon, a story that also works a lot better in the live-action adaptation format, it's relatively grounded, there's no campy dance musicals, and you can still feel the weight and emotional beats because the actors are allowed to act and the director is returning. It feels like that seems to be the way to best do an adaptation if you had to, and Disney have only learned how to get crappier and crappier. Maybe with a rival on the side, they will step up a bit and make something with a bit more artistic integrity, but I don't have very high hopes. Lilo and Stitch is also one of the worst Disney live-action remakes they've ever made, and now that they're happy doing a non-musical remake and one in the early 2000s, it's probably not long before the 3D animated stuff also will be done in live-action. Just cuz. But as far as I'm concerned, yeah, the live-action Disney remake is very much dying, and hopefully we'll see more of that manifest as we hear more of the public opinion over the years. I think Snow White and Lilo and Stitch have been a massive dent on that reputation, but I guess we'll just have to see where things roll out from there. For now, my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this whole ramble. I'd love to hear all your thoughts on more. What's the best Disney live-action remake? And how could they possibly do one well? Or let's talk more How to Train Your Dragon. This is a video I've been considering as probably one of the hardest ones I've had to make all year. This video was prompted by a playlist collaboration with Cult Popture called The Director Project. They're reaching out to video essayists across the platform to focus on directors at the start of each month. Last time a bunch covered Steven Spielberg and his movies, and this month it's all about Hayao Miyazaki, head of one of the most artistically idealized film studios in the world. No pressure. And the reason I come to such hesitation on a project like this is that, simply put, I'm not much of an artsy guy. Deep diving into thematic discussions and highlighting a perspective in a film is not something that comes too naturally to me. Simple review critiques and exploring the speculation of new ideas is more my kind of forte. And I certainly don't have an arsenal of random artistic trivia knowledge like some other essayists I watch do. But nevertheless, when watching most Miyazaki films, it's clear to everyone watching that the tone and approach of his storytelling is something that can't be perceived as anything less than beautiful, beautiful art. And a personal favourite of mine has to come in the form of this, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Everything about this film just captivates me. The story, the theming, the execution, the world, the performances, the music, and the scale. I love the steampunk, diesel punk kind of genre, and this kind of film absolutely scratches that itch. And yet, as someone who mostly looks at films with just the story or world in mind, I can't help but feel that the importance of a film like this is so much greater than I can properly enunciate. The general premise behind Nausicaa follows a post-apocalyptic world set 1,000 years after the 7 Days of Fire, a fiery explosive war that destroyed civilization and gave bloom to a vast toxic jungle. Now, only small factions remain of humankind, and those that do survive are crushed under the growing spread of the toxins of the forest and the gigantic mutant insects that reside in it. Amidst the dire circumstances stands Nausicaa, Princess of the Wind Valley, a small village that has learned to coexist near the toxins thanks to the protection given from the wind in their region and the use of controlled small bursts of fire. And though everyone fears this looming toxic threat, Nausicaa is the one to see the true beauty in its nature and resolves to cure its poison through purification rather than overt fire and force, as 2 neighbouring kingdoms have chosen to do. And it's funny, because there are some very obvious themes to be taken from this story. It's incredibly environmentalist and awfully anti-war and anti-violence, preaching the act of harmony, love, and the value of life in all forms. But while I could sit here and ramble about the extreme ideas that us humans are the real toxins in the natural world or whatever, I don't think that's really what I want to do. Whenever I imagine a Studio Ghibli film, the exact same vision always comes to mind. It's the deep blue sky and the saturated green grass. Every time, the combination of those 2 colours are always what jumps straight to me. Every time I see it, I'm blown away. And it's just because even reality doesn't look that good. I've been to green fields before on a nice sunny day, but nothing holds a candle to the fantasy world of these Studio Ghibli films. And it's especially the case for me as a colorblind person. It's somewhat saddening to know that as I look around my real-world surroundings, I will never see this particular tone of sky blue, or this saturated green in the grass and the specks of yellow flowers within them. I literally can't see them IRL. Heck, even the images of the fields I'm looking at now isn't as blooming as the ones you're likely seeing. And maybe that's why I was never really much of an artsy kid. I mean, why should I care about all these paintings and colour palettes when, to me, they're just muted, ununique schmuck in my faded eyes? So then, why is it when I look at this, even with no kind of lush green lands to look at, why is it even the apocalyptic wasteland of Nausicaa somehow speaks out to me? Technically pre-Ghibli, but whatever. Why is it when fields in my own hometown and artistic masterpieces made by legends have no inkling of an effect on me, yet something as dilapidated as this world is the thing that speaks to me? I don't really know. I don't have art references to sporadically bring up to connect you to some emotion I felt at some particular scene in this movie. But the few long-term images I have retained, I guess you could call art at a stretch of the imagination. Apocalyptic worlds, while often not exactly bursting with colour most of the time, have always pulled me in just through the imaginative fantasy of exploring something new with practically no rules attached. The idea of rummaging through a destroyed home to piece together the story of its heyday, all the while seeing the valued items that fill its remains available to be collected, always fills me with this sense of childlike exploration. 4 years ago, I was captivated by this one article I saw of a 27-year-old photographer, Kiao Wei Long, who had snuck into radioactive ghost towns in Fukushima following a nuclear rupture in 2011 thanks to natural disasters. What he came to find was a world entirely frozen in time. The townspeople were forewarned and evacuated in a hurry before earthquakes and tsunamis plagued the lands. What remains 5 years later is an eerie sense of quiet chaos. People had left in such a hurry that clothes would still be found in the laundromats, cars were often left parked permanently, and anything loose was quickly spread across the floor, either from the initial panicked motion or the earthquake that followed. The magazine shop I particularly remember for how each issue was intrinsically dated and forgotten to time. A boxed PlayStation 2 was simply cast aside in the wreckage, supermarket items piled upon the now non-visible floor, and calendars were permanently marked as March 11th, 2011. The people were long gone, but the essence of their livelihood still remained in small parts across this radioactive danger zone. Despite the context of unavoidable disasters, human error, fear of mortality, and abandoning one's home and belongings, when I look at these kind of photos, I see a kind of beauty in all of it. I'd want to read the magazines and explore for myself if there wasn't such a thick chemical smell in the air and a supposed burning sensation on the eyes. Much like Nausicaa, seeing the peace of the natural world like this fills me with a morbid sense of motivation in the melancholy of it all. But I think beyond just the doom and gloom concept of this post-apocalyptic world, what really drives more of the fantastical immersion for me is just the pure scale of the world we see throughout the film's runtime. Sure, I've seen Lord of the Rings a handful of times and watched a lot of walking scenes, but the true scale of journey I've never fully grasped. But what really helps in Nausicaa's case is the newfangled sci-fi airship that is her glider, giving us this futuristic joy of being able to just spew across the lands at a jet's pace, whilst also blessing us with these gigantic, beautiful landscapes of small moving parts against a much bigger picture. These are probably some of my favourite shots in the movie, just in being able to capture yet more beauty in an otherwise barren and plagued desert. And then following on from that, this glider isn't the only one of its kind. Yeah, okay, I realize Miyazaki kinda has a thing for airships in most of his movies, but even in just Nausicaa alone, there's the sci-fi jet design, the steampunk archaic one, the domineering diesel punk ships, and of course the Koopa clown car. And while they represent different factions in their own ways, they also hint to this overriding idea that yes, this world's habitability is hanging on by a thread, and yet humans are still thriving, at least technologically. Although shrinking in landmass, the humans that remain have built these vast machines that allow them to traverse the in-betweens in mere moments, enabling them to outpace even the largest of insects and granting them powerful yet dangerous weapons on both the world they inhabit and onto each other. While I wouldn't want to live in the world of Nausicaa per se, the positives that have arisen make me kind of jealous that this kind of thing isn't within my grasp. But moving on from just the beauty and awe the world gives me, there is a glaring conflict that comes about in this world. And it's the humans. Not necessarily against the natures of the world, according to the final messaging of the film. No. It's always been between each other. The politically charged actions between neighbouring factions that clash to impact everybody. With the examples of the kingdoms in the film, there's the Tolmekians, who intend to retake back control of the planet for humankind by reviving an ancient warrior to burn and destroy the toxic jungle, and then there's the Pejite, who oppose the Tolmekians having such a dominating weapon and are willing to abuse insect kind in order to do their bidding. All the while Nausicaa in the middle has learned that fire is only good in small doses and that harmony should instead be achieved. In fact, burning down the jungle in the first place will only lead to more pollution than ever before thanks to its secret purifying properties underground. Now, I didn't watch this film until I was in my 20s, so I don't know how I'd really react to the politics as a kid. But as an adult, especially in these times, the discussion of the actions of our leaders is something that totally resonates with me more as it's grown more prevalent and toxic in the real world. I mean, literally as this was being written and recorded, the US elections were in its standstill the entire time. But while politics is usually about the dramas of the day, always moving ahead to the next scandal, the next debate, the next replacement member, the politics in this film dwells on the lingering political issues in the backs of all of our minds. You know the one. In the 1960s, science was just coming to grasp the warming effect of carbon dioxide gas. In the 70s, scientists favoured that this was our reality. By the 80s, we were long overdue for some action, and by the 90s, it was blasphemy to still be ignoring the elephant in the room. In the 2000s, what we were doing was beyond ignorant. But hey, at least in the 2010s, the UK got some paper straws and a 5p charge for using plastic bags. Progress. How long will it be before some serious diverting changes are to be made by our world leaders? In Nausicaa, the world was destroyed thanks to weapons of mass destructions, and the effects were felt for 1,000 years. Is this fantasy land with jet gliders and mutant insects really our real future? Maybe not the insects, but the issue of climate change is something all of us constantly forget. General opinion in most places seems to agree that it does exist, but the moment it's not being preached and protested about, it just gets archived in the back of our minds while more short-term, smaller issues take the forefront. It's not necessarily an evil trait of ours, it's just basic human psychology. We do it everywhere, for the efficiency of our brains and our memories. We do it with the idea of the torturous meat industry that we probably don't agree with, but if it's not on screen, it's not in our minds anymore. Same can be said with any particularly bad news we hear thousands of miles away or even nearby. Or hell, we even do it on a personal level when grieving over a lost one. We don't think about them every waning moment, and a lot of times we just sorta forget for a while. How much longer can we forget before it's unforgettable and unavoidable? And what's interesting as I dug into Nausicaa research more is that none of the characters are fully set in stone to be evil figures, because for the most part, that isn't reality. Instead, Miyazaki says that some characters embody the Buddhist roots of evil, delusion, ill will, and greed, with fear being the driving force behind every bad decision, a totally normal and understandable human emotion. Other details I found while looking deeper are the obvious connections to anti-war and nuclear weaponry, which is pretty clear-cut, as well as a reflection to the Cold War going on at the time of the production in the 80s, but I kinda think that topic is a little out of my field as a 20-something Brit. Still, what I find speaks to me far more on a spiritual level is the sense of childlike wonder put onto the development of this world. Every landscape looks like an amazing spectacle that begs to be explored. It takes me back to days as a kid where I wanted to own a wooden sword from Twilight Princess just to swing around at trees nearby to my house. That sense of feeling like a mini hero against a growing unknown land, ever optimistic that there was some happy ending waiting for me on an adventure in any direction. Looking at that idea now as an adult, things seem extensively more grim. A happy ending isn't guaranteed on this adventure. The idea of heroism isn't just a career path you can really pick up, and even the likes of being into swords has had its stigmas in public discord in a sense. It's not about grabbing a weapon and swinging towards some mutual enemy anymore. Doing the right thing has expanded to a global-sized battle of geographically engineering our planet's landscapes and protesting against the reigns of monopolizing corporations fueling our planet's ecological downfall. That's certainly less fun than the tones of a new Zelda game. But at the end of the day, it's an adventure we're all on together, for better or worse. And though this abstract feat sounds monumental in scale to us as individuals or even as a species, it also brings to mind those space images we received in the 90s, the pale blue dot. Recreated a handful of times by any far-flung spacecraft, that pale blue dot is always us, our entire history, our entire livelihood, everything we have ever done and are currently doing, and potentially ever will do. Just a speck of dust amongst an endlessly expanding landscape. And the view from up here helps put everything into perspective. The task of reshaping the system of our energy consumption to change the course of our planet's climate is monumental. But this dot, thank you alarm, but this dot is all we have. It can be taken away just as easily as any other element of our being, recognizably diminished in scale by these slapbacks to reality. But while the kingdoms of Nausicaa are unaware of the positive futures of their reality or the dangers of their direct actions set in motion, we have an advantage in reality. We can totally foresee what's coming. We're aware of the negative impact we're causing. We know theoretically how to resolve our problems, and we know what kind of future awaits us in both the good and the bad ending. It all comes down to uniting our actions as a collective that our conflict arises. It's not the inhabitability of the world that's the issue, it's the conflicting humans that live in it, arguing on the small, unimportant short-term problems over the long-term gigantic threats. Now more than ever, there's a growing mist of unrest amongst us, and rage. Politics is an uncomfortable conversation. Every day, more and more of us become blind with rage, fuming at the prospects of others' opinions and the actions that follow. Divided across a growing number of labels and categories, when in reality, we're all in the same storm. Some of us have better boats than others, but if we're all hit by the same massive waves, we'll all be forced to face the same fate. Environmentalism is uncomfortable, easier to forget at the back of our minds, much like the reality behind non-vegetarianism or anything overtly negative to hear. And while there is much beauty in the way that Miyazaki makes Nausicaa unfold, what with its beautiful colours, wonderful messaging, masterful execution, and gripping story rife with fantastical machines, practical opinions, and loving relationships, the point it brings up is excruciatingly worrisome in a reflective sense. As a kid, I would love this movie for the open-eyed optimism of a world ready to be explored, with a hero story in the center, a love for the natural world, and a scale unlike anything I've properly been able to fathom before. And as an adult, I love this film for its fantastic merging of a symbolic representation of our concurrent problems and realities, backdrop on an intriguingly grim yet optimistic premise. Miyazaki's Nausicaa has gone on to inspire the likes of many productions, Final Fantasy being the big one with those oh-so-obvious chocobos down there, but even other games I've played in the past give me some strong Nausicaa vibes. Shadow of the Colossus with its expansively dry world and gigantic beasts, and Pikmin with its tune to nature and oversized insects. Both bring with it a kind of environmentalist tone with how they explore the beauty of their natural yet dangerous expanses. Watching this film doesn't magically turn people into some wacky environmentalist eco-fascists. This film doesn't tell people to sacrifice others for the good of our planet, or even speak to some people the same way it does to me. But I think, even to a small degree, it always revives that uncomfortable conversation in the back of our minds. And while some may still focus on the youthful desire to be a sword-swinging adventurer while they watch this story unfold, for me, I always come back to those blue skies and green fields I always associate with Ghibli. I wonder if, even though I can't see the true saturation of this image, will it always linger as boldly and as colourfully as it can in our reality? Will there be a day when these vibrant signs of life fade into a progressively paler small dot out in the great expanse? Is our future one with a last-minute shift as time quickly creeps up on us? Or will we too be cast into the backs of the minds of our planet, frozen in time in a world where evidence of our existence lingers, but us ourselves are long gone, taken away in an instant where natural disasters rendered us obsolete? I don't have an answer for us. I have opinions, sure, as everybody else does, but before we can even begin to address the real problem directly, we'd have to overcome the blinding rage our societies have developed upon themselves before we can tackle the slow burn that is a super-sped natural downfall. Will we develop the technology to coexist with the new reality we've brewed and discuss the uncomfortable conversation with those with other priorities? Or will it remain forgotten for now, distracted by the fun of a fantasy world or a new, minute yet angeringly prioritized conflict, only to be forgotten ever more against a continually shrinking pale blue dot? To think it was all brought out thanks to the performances of a 2005 Shia LaBeouf, Patrick Stewart and Mark Hamill, and a story twice as old as me. Hopefully in another 24 years, we won't be bringing up the same old conversation. And that is pretty much every video essay we have done. There are some other videos that could have fallen in there. There's a few reviews I did that were a little bit more abstract. And similarly, you could argue things like the Scene Breakdown series of video essays. The first one I did was way before the Scene series. It kind of was more video essay-y, but you've already had 3 hours. I think that's more than enough. But I hope you have enjoyed. I'll be surprised how many actually reach the end of this video. It'll be interesting nonetheless. But thank you very much for reaching it this far in. But for now, I'll finally end it off there. My name's been Daz. Do let us know your thoughts on any of these topics. It's interesting to have these kind of discussions, whether the views work for it or not. But otherwise, I shall see you all in a little bit. Cheerio!